Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Georgia Williams. Georgia Williams was born on September 17, 1995, in Telford, Shropshire, England. She grew up in a close and loving family with her parents, Lynette and Steve Williams, and her older sister Scarlet. From an early age, Georgia demonstrated a kind and thoughtful nature, consistently looking for ways to help others and make those around her happy. This admirable quality eventually becomes her weakness. Despite being bullied in middle school, but Georgia's life improved in high school. She made a group of friends and became a well-liked and popular student. Her kind nature and good leadership skills helped her win the position of class monitor. She pursued her passion for helping others by joining the Air Cadets Corps, with the ultimate goal of becoming a medical officer in the Royal Air Force. At 17, Georgia started working at a local gas station, where she quickly became friends with her coworkers. One of them was Jamie Reynolds, a 22-year-old man who seemed quiet and isolated from the rest of the group. Georgia, being a kind and caring person, reached out to Jamie in friendship, wanting to help him feel less alone. Thanks to her efforts, Jamie started to fit in at work, participating in group activities and making friends with his coworkers. As time went on, Jamie developed strong feelings for Georgia, seeing her as the only person who had shown him kindness and believed in him. Feeling hopeful, Jamie started to think that maybe Georgia felt the same way about him. Emboldened by his newfound confidence, he mustered the nerve to express his true feelings to Georgia and inquired if she would be open of a romantic relationship. However, Georgia, being considerate of Jamie's feelings, let him down gently. She explained that she didn't want to ruin their friendship by getting romantically involved. Jamie seems to respect Georgia's choice and tries to maintain their friendship. However, he is actually harboring an increasingly unhealthy obsession with her. One day, while they were working together at the gas station, Jamie opened up to Georgia about his unhappiness with his life. He told her that he wanted to quit his job and pursue his true passions. Jamie had always dreamed of turning his passions into a career, and Georgia was eager to support him. One day, they started talking about his hobbies, and Jamie revealed his love for photography. Georgia saw an opportunity and encouraged Jamie to pursue it as a career. Excited about the idea, Jamie asked Georgia to help him create a professional portfolio and asked if she would be his first model. Georgia, being a good friend, agreed to help. They scheduled a photo shoot for Sunday, May 26, 2013, at Jamie's parents' house, with a few mutual friends joining in. However, as the day approached, Georgia found herself in a difficult situation. Her family was hosting a barbecue, and her grandparents, whom she hadn't seen in a long time, would be attending. Georgia thought about canceling the photo shoot at the last minute, but she didn't want to let Jamie down. She decided to keep her commitment and assured her family that she would only be a short drive away. She planned to quickly take a few photos and then return to her family's barbecue, hoping to make both her friend and family happy. On that day, Georgia got ready quickly, doing her hair and makeup, and wearing jeans and a leather jacket. Her father complimented her as she left home at 7:30 p.m., saying she looked beautiful, like Sandy from Greece. Georgia's family expected her to return home soon. However, as the hours went by and she didn't come home, her loved ones started to worry. At first, her mother wasn't too concerned, thinking Georgia was probably just busy with the photo shoot or spending time with friends. She sent a text asking when the photo shoot would end. Georgia replied, saying it had already ended and that she was with friends and might be home late. Her mother wasn't worried after getting the text, as it seemed like a typical message from Georgia, with the usual 3 kissy face emojis at the end. Georgia's mother trusted her to be responsible, which is why she wasn't worried at first. As the night went on, Georgia's parents went to bed, thinking she would be home by morning. However, when they woke up the next day and Georgia still hadn't returned, they started to feel uneasy. Georgia's mother sent her a text message at 6:30 a.m. asking where she was. But it wasn't until 7:30 a.m. that a response arrived, saying George had spent the night at a friend's house and her phone battery was running out. The message said that if George didn't respond again, it was because her phone had died. George's mother was unaware that the messages were not written by her daughter. On May 27th, Georgia's parents thought she would come home after a music festival. They expected her to come home the next morning because she was excited about her first driving lesson. As the night went on and George didn't come home, her parents became more and more anxious. They stayed up late waiting for her, but there was no sign of her. They contacted relatives and friends to see if anyone had heard from George, but no one had seen or heard from her in days. This makes them even more insecure and unsure of what is going on. When Georgia failed to return home the next morning for her scheduled driving lesson, her family quickly reported her missing to the police. They gave the police all the information they had, but they only knew that Georgia had been to a photo shoot at Jamie Reynolds' home and nothing about her whereabouts after that. The police started investigating and focused on Jamie Reynolds. What they found out about him was alarming and raised concerns for Georgia's safety. It turns out that in 2008, Jamie got into trouble with the law for assaulting and attempting to strangle a teenager. Despite the seriousness of the incident, he was let off with a warning and not charged. When the police discovered this, they suspected Jamie even more and considered him the main suspect in Georgia's disappearance. They went to his home, but no one answered. They broke in. They searched the premises but couldn't find Jamie, so prompting a large-scale manhunt to track him down. After conducting a thorough investigation at the petrol station, it was clear that none of Jamie and Georgia's coworkers had seen them. Their absence from work was unusual and raised concerns, as it was out of character for both of them. Although Jamie's parents were away on vacation, but they had already given the authorities key details about Jamie's van, such as its registration information. The police in Shropshire quickly shared this information with police agencies nationwide, asking them to be on the lookout for the van. Soon, authorities located Jamie in Glasgow, Scotland, which is 428 miles away from his home. His abrupt departure from the country, which came without warning, raised concerns and hinted at a potential problem. On May 30th, police in Glasgow arrested Jamie Reynolds at a local hotel due to suspicions of kidnapping Georgia. They immediately questioned him about Georgia's location, but Jamie claimed he didn't know where she was and provided no useful information to the investigators. He was then taken to Shropshire for more questioning. Meanwhile, Georgia's family and friends waited nervously for news, but what they heard about the investigation was deeply upsetting. The lack of progress was crushing, making their pain even worse. With Jamie in custody as the main suspect, the police searched his home for evidence. During the search, they found a camera with an SD card, but their hopes of finding important clues were crushed when they discovered that all the files had been deleted. The camera was sent to the police station for forensic analysis, where experts worked to recover the deleted files. Eventually, they managed to retrieve the data, revealed a shocking secret to the investigation. Among the recovered files are several images taken on the day Georgia went missing, providing a haunting look at she's final moments. The initial photos showed Georgia in normal poses at the start of the photo shoot, confirming she was at Jamie's residence that day. Although she appeared content and cooperative, it was clear Georgia had no idea about Jamie's sinister intentions. Sadly, she unintentionally entered a hazardous situation without realizing the risks, which ultimately led to her tragic death. As authorities went through the images, the tone became increasingly dark and unsettling. Subsequent photos reveal a series of harrowing incidents, depicting a distressed Georgia stripped of her clothes, standing weakly on a red recycling bin. Her hands appear to be tied behind her back with a rope hanging ominously above her. The footage captured Jamie Reynolds' horrific act. He filmed Georgia's final moments, showing her desperate struggle for breath. He later committed heinous acts of necrophilia, violating her lifeless body in various rooms of the house. Jamie's parents' bed was where he further compounded the horror. He took hundreds of additional photos showing Georgia in degrading positions, documenting his depravity. He stripped her of her jewelry, keeping them as trophies of his horrific crime. The police conducted a thorough search of Jamie's home and found a large collection of explicit photographs and videos, including content that depicted extreme violence, sexual assault, and murder. It was discovered that Jamie was not only in possession of these materials, but also actively involved in creating content that featured violent acts. Jamie's parents were alerted to their son's disturbing interests and immediately ended their vacation to meet with authorities. They revealed that Jamie had been exposed to violent and explicit content from the age of 14. It is possible that he was exposed to such content even earlier. Although his parents tried to intervene by blocking access to certain websites, Jamie found a way to circumvent their efforts. At the age of 14, he contacted the internet provider and set up his own private Wi-Fi connection, which allowed him to continue accessing the blocked websites without his parents' knowledge. When Jamie's parents first found out he was watching these videos, they became worried and contacted the police and Child Protective Services. However, the authorities said they couldn't take any action because watching such content wasn't against the law. As the police looked into the matter further, they found a set of notebooks containing 40 separate stories written by Jamie. These stories were centered around harming, sexually assaulting, and murdering women. Additionally, investigators discovered that Jamie had searched social media platforms, printed and marked images of young girls with nooses around their necks. One of the stories, titled "Georgia Williams Surprised," has a very similar plot to the incidents that led to Georgia's death. Authorities believe this narrative may have been a pre-planned scenario, intended to be carried out from the start. Jamie began writing this narrative in January and finished it just 3 weeks before the murder. Despite being questioned, Jamie refused to reveal the location of Georgia's body, insisting he was innocent. As a result, investigators had to painstakingly reconstruct Jamie's movements from the Monday morning after Georgia's murder. They started by reviewing surveillance footage of Jamie refueling his vehicle at a petrol station. Unbeknownst to them at the time, Georgia's body was hidden in the back of Jamie's van. After refueling, Jamie drove 60 miles to a movie theater, leaving Georgia's body in the van parked in the theater's lot. He then went inside to watch a movie. However, police lost track of Jamie after he left the theater and issued a public appeal for help finding him. The appeal was successful, with people reporting sightings of Jamie's van near the New York G Mountain Pass. The area, with its dense woods and muddy terrain, was where Jamie tried to evade capture. Locals remembered Jamie in his van, especially after it got stuck in the mud and Good Samaritans helped him get it out. Police followed up on this lead and searched the wooded area where Jamie was spotted. Unfortunately, they found Georgia's naked body in this secluded spot. Georgia's body was returned to Shropshire after being recovered. A post-mortem examination revealed she died from asphyxiation due to a ligature around her neck. Forensic analysis also showed bruising on her back, indicating Jamie had used his knee to press her down. Initially, Jamie denied any involvement in Georgia's murder, but on the first day of his trial in December 2013, he suddenly stood up and pleaded guilty to all charges. During the trial, Georgia's father gave a heartfelt address to the court. They had to endure the pain for a long time as they witnessed their daughter's body lying motionless in the hospital's rest house, a traumatic experience that haunted both him and his wife. The trial also uncovered Jamie's previous run-ins with the law. In 2008, he received a warning from a judge for keeping a 1-year-old girl captive in his home. A disturbing incident foreshadowing Georgia's tragic death. In 2011, Jamie was criticized for recklessly backing his car into a girl's vehicle. This incident occurred after the girl had turned down his romantic advances. Although the case was eventually closed, Judge Mr. Justice Wilkie expressed serious concerns about Jamie's behavior, calling him a sexual deviant and warning about his potential to become a dangerous serial offender. As a result, Jamie received a whole life term, a sentence typically reserved for the most severe crimes, meaning he would spend the rest of his life in prison without parole. At the time, Jamie was the 46th person to receive this sentence and the youngest person in history to be given a whole life term. During sentencing, Judge Justice Wilkie highlighted the extreme suffering Georgia endured, emphasizing the torturous nature of her experience. Jamie's obsession with violent and sadistic pornography had led to a horrific display of control over his victim, ultimately resulting in her tragic death. Jamie Reynolds hung his head in shame as Georgia's parents and sister listened to the disturbing details of her death and the abuse she suffered at his hands. The courtroom was extremely tense as the jury saw gruesome images of Georgia's final moments, causing her family to leave in distress. In 2014, Jamie tried to appeal his life sentence but was unsuccessful. A review of the case the following year criticized police officers, children's services, and mental health professionals for their handling of Jamie before Georgia's murder. The review found that these agencies failed to work together properly, despite Jamie having come to the attention of law enforcement 5 years earlier for attempting to strangle another girl. Georgia's parents were deeply saddened by the report, regretting the missed chances to intervene and prevent their daughter's death. They stated that they cried when they read about the agency's failures, as it was clear that Jamie was likely to commit murder. They believed that Georgia's death could have been prevented. Outside the courtroom, Georgia's father shared the family's overwhelming sadness, stating that no sentence could ever satisfy them because it wouldn't bring Georgia back to life. He emphasized that their loss was irreparable and that Jamie, despite his lengthy prison sentence, still had the one thing he took from their daughter, life. He noted that what to cause them grief is that Jamie, even while serving a life sentence, still gets to live. Jamie Reynolds remains in prison to this day. Georgia's mother, Lynette, later wrote a book titled Our Georgia, in which she shared the family's traumatic experiences. The book highlights the failures of the legal system that allowed Jamie, a violent film enthusiast, to remain at large and eventually commit murder. This book is a heartfelt tribute to Georgia and provides an insight into the devastating aftermath of her tragic passing. Georgia's death caused immense pain to those who loved her, leaving a huge gap that can never be filled. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Carmen Thomas. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987, in South Africa. Her life took a drastic turn when her father passed away when she was just 10 years old. Overwhelmed by grief, her family moved to live with relatives in Whitby, United Kingdom. However, the move did not bring the peace they had hoped for, and they eventually returned to South Africa. When Carmen turned 18, she decided to leave behind with her relatives and later relocated to London to pursue her education. She earned a master's degree in marketing and quickly became known for her charismatic and outgoing personality. Carmen formed strong bonds with many people and became a loyal friend and companion. However, living in a big city like London came with its expenses, and Carmen had to work hard to maintain a decent standard of living. By day, she worked as a marketer in a store, and by night, she worked part-time at a gentleman's club. Although her career choices may have raised eyebrows, Carmen was a woman of principle and never compromised her values. She conducted herself with dignity and earned the respect of her clients. It was during her time at the club that she met Brad Callahan, a charming and flamboyant man. Brad was born in April 1978 in New Zealand to parents who separated when he was just 9 years old. He stayed with his mother and later moved to Australia. Brad graduated from university in 2001 with a degree in construction engineering. He was then offered a job as a chief structural engineer for a large business complex in the UK by a prominent construction company. To navigate the complex's high-stakes negotiations and enhance his professional status, Brad sought the services of a gentleman's agency, where he met Carmen. She was intelligent, tall, and beautiful, with striking dark eyes and black hair. However, Brad's demanding career and ambitious nature left him little time for a serious relationship. Despite this, Brad and Carmen got along well after a dinner, and their casual interactions eventually blossomed into a solid friendship. Over time, their friendship deepened into a romance, and they began living together. Their relationship was built on mutual trust, care, and support. When Carmen got pregnant, Brad decided it would be better to go back to New Zealand, a country with cleaner air and a more laid-back lifestyle. In March 2005, they returned to Auckland. After the birth of their son Jack, they experienced immense happiness. They prioritized Jack's safety and well-being, making sure he had everything he needed for a happy childhood. However, the arrival of their son brought significant challenges to their relationship. The first problems arose in the relationship between Carmen and Brad due to disagreements on how to raise their child, causing tension and instability. After 3 years, they decided to go their separate ways, but shared joint custody of their son, Jack. The breakup was challenging for both, but they made a genuine effort to maintain a positive relationship for Jack's sake. Carmen and Jack eventually moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. With time, Carmen regained her emotional balance and started a new life without Brad. In 2008, she and her son relocated to a house on a street near Brad's, so Jack could be close to his father. Having lost her own father at a young age, Carmen wanted to ensure Jack always had a father figure in his life. Despite her decision to live near Brad, Carmen's friends and family believed she and Brad still had a good friendship, but in reality, they only spent time together when it was related to Jack. As time passed, life continued for Carmen. After parting ways, Carmen and Brad each attempted to move on. Brad resumed his career as a construction engineer and, in May 2009, began a new relationship, which ultimately led to an engagement. Meanwhile, Carmen devoted herself to raising their son and, much to Brad's dismay, returned to her work at a gentleman's club. This choice troubled Brad. Carmen repeatedly presented Brad with ultimatums, but he dismissed her requests, focusing on his impending marriage and plans for fatherhood once again. This marked the beginning of adjustments to his financial commitments, specifically affecting the alimony payments for the maintenance of their son, Jack, which Brad made in accordance with their agreement. However, Carmen viewed the financial constraints as a catalyst in an escalating series of conflicts. Tensions escalated until March 19, 2010, when a domestic violence incident occurred. Police responded to a neighbor's call about a dispute and mediated the situation. As a result, Carmen received a formal warning from law enforcement. On June 29, 2010, Brad visited Carmen's house to discuss a new school for Jack and to sign a written agreement for child support. However, Carmen was unhappy with the document and asked Brad to leave, yelling that Jack was not his son as he departed. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to contact Carmen again, but she did not respond. On July 13, 2010, Brad reported Carmen missing to the police, who began searching for her. Through video footage and interviews with neighbors, investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline of events leading up to Carmen's disappearance. They discovered that on June 29, a surveillance camera at a nearby supermarket had captured footage of Carmen, providing a potential lead in the search. During their investigation of the rented house where Carmen and Jack lived, police noticed that there was no outdoor garbage can. Inside the house, they found bloodstains on the front door, washing machine, sink, and shower. To confirm the presence of blood, forensic scientists used luminol, a substance that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin. The test revealed multiple patterns of blood on the bathroom door and floor. The landlord reported that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming, followed by prolonged crying and moaning. When she knocked on Carmen's door, no one answered. She looked out the window and saw a street trash can and an overturned drying rack, which caught her attention. She called her husband, but before he arrived, Brad walked out of the house, carrying soiled clothes. He told the landlord that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlord noticed that Brad appeared to have just taken a shower. She had no reason to doubt his story, so she didn't call the police. The search for Carmen continued, and her cell phone activity caught the police's attention. Although messages were being sent from her phone regularly, the tone and language used were unusual and didn't match her previous communication style. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found, and in the back seat, they discovered her luggage, clothes, and other personal belongings. The police investigation into Carmen's disappearance began with the examination of her seized suitcase, which revealed traces of blood and a note indicating she owed money to her employer. An envelope with Misty's name and $270 was also found in the glove compartment. Inspector Mark Benefield suspected foul play after finding blood in the car and launched a search for Carmen's body in the countryside southeast of Auckland, but it was inconclusive. As the investigation continued, police analyzed Carmen's and Brad's phones, discovering they had been in close proximity to each other during the search. However, Carmen's phone was not connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. A crucial piece of evidence was a missing trash can, which had disappeared from its usual spot near the house on the day Carmen vanished. A neighbor reported seeing the can being taken away through her window. Police suspected the trash can might have been used to dispose of evidence. When EE examined Brad's phone records and bank card details, then they found that on June 30th, Brad had purchased a meat cleaver, a large plastic container, and several garbage bags, which raised suspicions. By studying Brad's daily routine, police identified some unusual events, including a day when he arrived early at the construction site and walked alone around the property for an extended period. While it was not unusual for a supervisor to be on site early, the police found it noteworthy. After gathering evidence, including Carmen's cell phone and suspicious purchases, they began to suspect Brad of murder. They believed Brad had killed his former lover, Carmen Thomas, by hitting her multiple times in the head and then carefully hiding her body. On September 21st, Brad was arrested and charged with Carmen's murder and attempting to obstruct justice. Brad's second son was born while he was in custody, causing him to become emotional and resentful. 9 days after his arrest, Brad broke down and revealed to investigators the location of Carmen's body. It turned out that Brad had attempted to create an alibi by making it seem like Carmen had left for Hamilton and never returned. However, under questioning, he eventually detailed the events of the day Carmen was killed, revealing that his plan had not been as perfect as he thought. Brad admitted that Carmen and Brad had a heated argument, which ended with Carmen telling Brad that Jack was not his son. In a fit of rage, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house. However, he returned 5 minutes later, grabbed a baseball bat, and brutally attacked Carmen, striking her in the head with such force that she fell unconscious, bleeding profusely. Despite realizing the gravity of his actions, Brad continued to assault Carmen, throwing several punches. Memories of happier times flashed before his eyes, but his anger and resentment consumed him. Brad knew his life would never be the same after this moment, and he could never undo the damage. Nevertheless, he felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, believing that he had solved his problem and ensured that Jack was now his alone. Brad regained his composure, took a shower, and quietly left Carmen's house. In the following days, he devised a plan to dispose of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. He met his friend outside a supermarket and asked him to buy black garbage bags, kerosene, and cleaning products, hoping to avoid raising suspicion. Brad then returned to the apartment, meticulously cleaned up the bloodstains, wrapped Carmen's body in a bag, and disposed of it in a trash can. After killing Carmen, Brad dismembered her body into 8 pieces to make it easier to dispose of. He cut off her legs at the hip joints and then cut each leg in half at the knee. He also severed her arms and head from her torso. A few days later, on July 3rd, Brad met a friend at a boat ramp in Okahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He confessed to his friend that he had killed Carmen during an argument and asked for help disposing of her body. However, his friend refused to provide a boat to dump the remains into the sea. Over the next few days, Brad drove to Ware Ridge in West Auckland and buried the dismembered body parts in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He left a suitcase of clothes and some of her personal belongings in the car to make it seem like she had left voluntarily. However, he made a critical mistake by including bloody clothes in the suitcase. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Brad started sending text messages from Carmen's cell phone to her friends, pretending to be her. He claimed that she was not feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. However, this plan ultimately backfired on him. On October 1st, police excavated the burial site indicated by Brad and found the body of Carmen Thomas. Her remains were discovered in plastic containers, carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Wayfair Ridge. An autopsy revealed that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family on October 13th. Tragically, her young son Jack, who had been waiting and hoping to see his mother again, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, Brad Callahan's first court hearing was held. Judge Winning determined that the crime was unintentional and took into account Brad's claim that he acted impulsively in a state of rage. However, the judge was more severe in his assessment of the subsequent cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A retrial was held on November 25, 2011, where police officers filled the High Court in Auckland. In a surprise move, Brad Callahan made 2 guilty pleas, admitting to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. A judge has sentenced 31-year-old Brad Callahan to life in prison for murdering Carmen Thomas. Brad was also given a 6-year sentence for attempting to interfere with the investigation into Thomas's death. The judge considered this one of the most serious cases of attempted interference with justice, describing Brad's actions as extremely serious. During the trial at Auckland High Court, the judge criticized the brutality of Thomas's murder, but decided not to impose the harshest possible sentence. The courtroom was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents who had traveled from South Africa. Judge Venin condemned Brad's attempts to cover up his crime, which involved considerable effort and deception. The 6-year sentence for interfering with the investigation will be served at the same time as the life sentence. In a statement, the Thomas family expressed their ongoing anger and grief, saying that no punishment can bring their daughter back. However, they are relieved that Brad will be in prison for a long time, giving him the opportunity to reflect on the harm he has caused. Little boy Jack Brad is living with his grandmother in another town under an assumed name. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Chris Watts. Shanann and Christopher Watts, both from North Carolina, met in 2012. Shanann was from Aberdeen while Chris hailed from Spring Lake. On November 3, 2012, they got married, but not everyone was pleased with their union. Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, did not attend the wedding, due to Cindy's dislike of Shanann and the way she treated her son. A year after their wedding, Shanann and Chris made a significant decision to buy a new home in Frederick, Colorado. This marked a new chapter in their lives as they started fresh in their new home. After relocating to Colorado, the couple looked forward to starting a family. Their dream was realized on December 17, 2013, with the birth of their daughter, Bella Marie. 2 years later, on July 17, 2015, they welcomed their second daughter, Celeste Catherine, affectionately known as Cece. Shanann was diagnosed with lupus at a young age, a chronic autoimmune disease that affects various parts of the body. The immune system mistakenly attacks healthy cells and tissues, producing autoantibodies that target and destroy them, leading to inflammation and tissue damage. This diagnosis brought devastating news. It would be challenging for her to conceive and have children. Shanann had always dreamed of becoming a mother, and this revelation shattered her. However, she defied the odds, experiencing the incredible joy of motherhood not once, but twice. Shanann was a warm and compassionate person who radiated kindness and positivity. Those who knew her described her as a loving and caring individual who made everyone feel welcome. She had a driven personality, always striving to create a better life for herself and her family. Her vibrant and warm nature effortlessly drew people to her. Shanann was an exceptional mother to her two daughters, Bella and Cece. Her love for them was boundless, and she cherished being a mother more than anything in the world. She was dedicated to providing for her children in every way possible, nurturing and supporting them unconditionally. Bella, the older sibling, was a caring and nurturing child who enjoyed taking care of her younger sister. Cece, on the other hand, was a lively and energetic child who brought joy and laughter to everyone's lives with her vibrant personality. Shanann's friends and family thought she had a perfect marriage, but they found Chris hard to get close to. Despite this, they welcomed him because Shanann was deeply in love with him. In 2015, Shanann and Chris filed for bankruptcy due to significant financial struggles. These included a large mortgage, car payments, loans, medical bills, and a substantial amount of credit card debt. At the time, Chris worked at Anadarko Petroleum, and Shanann worked at a children's hospital call center. By 2016, Shanann had started a new career as a consultant for a multi-level marketing company. She sold a nutritional supplement called Thrive, which was administered through a patch. Shanann was extremely passionate about her job. According to a coworker, Cynthia DeRosette, everyone who met her was drawn to her energy. Shanann was happy with her life, husband, and two daughters, but she had one wish remaining: to have a baby boy to complete their family. In spring 2018, she got an unexpected but pleasant surprise when she found out she was pregnant for the third time. This news filled her with excitement and anticipation. After further tests, Shanann discovered she was having a baby boy. Shanann and Chris were overjoyed, and they chose to name their baby Nico. When Bella and Cece, Shannon's daughters, heard they were going to be big sisters, they were thrilled. During the summer of 2018, Shanann, who was pregnant with Nico at the time, visited her family in North Carolina, while Chris remained in Colorado for work. Shanann took her daughters, Bella and Cece, to visit Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie. Despite her strained relationship with her in-laws, Shanann wanted her daughters to spend time with their grandparents. When they arrived, Cindy prepared a snack for Cece despite knowing about her peanut allergy, which Shanann had warned her about. Cindy still served Cece a snack containing peanuts, which deeply upset Shanann. She felt that Cindy had recklessly endangered Cece's life. While visiting family in North Carolina, Shanann noticed a strange change in Chris's communication with her. He stopped responding to her messages and calls, leaving her confused and puzzled. When she asked him what was going on, Chris explained that he had taken on more responsibilities at work due to new employees, but assured her it was nothing to worry about. On July 31st, Chris flew from Colorado to North Carolina to spend the week with Shanann and their two daughters, Bella and Cece. The girls were thrilled to see their dad, and as Chris stepped off the plane, they rushed to him, beaming with excitement. Chris hugged them tightly, but his greeting to Shannon was different. Instead of a kiss, he simply nodded at her. Shannon felt deeply hurt by Chris's distant behavior and was unable to hide her emotions. She texted a friend, confessing her growing concern and sadness. She felt like Chris had changed somehow, and she barely recognized the man she had married. Her words were filled with a mix of sorrow and confusion. Shannon texted her friend to say that her husband Chris was refusing to talk to her, even though they were in the same room. Instead of speaking directly, they were communicating through their phones. Shannon shared a photo with her friend that showed her and Chris sitting on separate couches facing away from each other. In her texts, Shannon confided in her friend that she suspected Chris might be interested in someone else. Her friend was shocked and insisted that Chris would never do that, given how much he loved Shannon. In a heartfelt message to her friend, Shannon revealed that Chris had confessed to her that he no longer thought they were compatible. This revelation left Shannon stunned, as she had always believed their love was strong. Chris had made things even more difficult for Shannon by admitting that he had hoped getting her pregnant would change his feelings for her. But unfortunately, this didn't happen. Shannon was devastated to hear this, as she valued their relationship and believed their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacles. Determined to rescue her family, Shannon proposed that she and Chris attend couples therapy together, aware that their relationship was struggling and hoping that a professional could help them get through their problems. However, Chris refused point blank. Shannon was prepared to make sacrifices and do everything possible to save their relationship, but she quickly came to realize that Chris was unwilling to meet her halfway. Despite her best attempts, Shannon understood that there was nothing Chris was willing to compromise on, and this made her efforts futile. After returning home to Colorado from a trip to North Carolina, Shannon, Chris, and their daughters settled back into their normal routine. However, Shannon's stay was short-lived as she soon embarked on another trip to Arizona for business. During her time in Arizona, Shannon's friends noticed a change in her behavior. Instead of being her usual cheerful self, she seemed confused, upset, and distressed. One evening in their hotel room, Shannon confided in her friends about her concerns. On August 11th, while Shannon was with her friends in Arizona, she received a notification on her phone showing a charge on her and Chris's account from a restaurant. Although this wasn't unusual, the amount of the bill raised concerns. Shannon wondered why it was so high and suspected that Chris might be dining with another woman. This suspicion left her feeling uneasy and uncertain. Shannon returned home from her business trip around 1:48 a.m. on August 13th. Her friend Nicole Atkinson drove her home. The doorbell camera footage showed Shannon entering her house at that time. Shannon's friends were worried when she failed to send her usual good morning messages. They knew she had a crucial appointment at the OBGYN at 9:30 a.m., which she would never miss. However, when she also missed a 12:30 p.m. business meeting, her close friend Nicole Atkinson became extremely concerned. Nicole was convinced something was amiss when no one had heard from Shannon all day. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Feeling a growing sense of urgency, Nicole decided to drive to Shannon's house. As she approached the house, her anxiety spiked. Shannon's van was parked in the garage and her daily shoes were by the front door. Nicole knocked on the front door, hoping Shannon would come out and explain that she had overslept and was tired from her previous day's flight. But Shannon didn't respond. Chris was contacted by one of Shannon's friends who were unable to reach her. He told them not to worry, saying she might be at a friend's house with their daughters. However, this confused Shannon's friends, since they were all in touch with each other and none knew where she was. Shannon didn't have plans to meet any of them. When her friends threatened to report Shannon and the girls missing to the Frederick Police Department, Chris didn't want to involve the police. Despite this, Nicole, worried about her friend, called 911 to report Shannon, Bella, and Cece missing. After Nicole contacted the police, an officer from the Frederick Police Department responded to Shannon and Chris's residence. The officer's body camera footage showed Nicole was visibly distraught over her missing friend. As Nicole was providing every detail she knew about Shannon and her daughters, Chris arrived at the house. Chris exited his vehicle and approached the officer, but it was apparent he didn't share Nicole's level of concern, despite his wife and daughters being missing. During the search of Shannon and Chris's house, the officer found Shannon's purse. Inside, the officer discovered medication prescribed to Shannon and her two daughters. This discovery further alarmed Nicole, but Chris remained calm. The officer also located Shannon's wedding band on the bedside table. The officer and Chris visited a neighbor to review footage from their security camera, which captured part of Shannon and Chris's driveway and garage. The footage showed Chris opening the garage door, moving around, and leaving the home at 5:28 a.m. As they watched the TV footage, Chris's demeanor began to shift. He grew nervous and fidgety, seemingly uncomfortable with what he was seeing on screen. Even his neighbor noticed Chris's strange behavior. When Chris left the house, the neighbor discreetly confided in the officer, expressing doubts about Chris's behavior, stating that he didn't think Chris was acting normally. Concerned about Shannon's well-being, her friends wanted to launch a search for Bella and Cece immediately. However, Chris vetoed the idea, warning them against joining the search. His lack of concern for his wife and daughters deeply troubled Shannon's friends, who couldn't understand his apathy. Officers went door to door in Shannon and Chris's neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen Shannon or noticed anything unusual. The next day, the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the search for Shannon, Bella, and Cece. The Boulder Police Department also provided cadaver dogs to search the property and house. As officers searched the home, a handler commented that the house smelled of cleaning solutions and looked unusually clean, which raised suspicions. The presence of cleaning solutions suggested that someone might be trying to conceal evidence or clean up potential clues. Chris gave an interview outside his home while it was being searched, saying he and Shannon had an emotional conversation before she left, but no argument. He made a heartfelt plea for their return, but came across as aloof and unemotional, sparking suspicion. On August 14th, Special Agent Coder conducted an interview with Chris. During this interview, Chris shared his theory that Shannon might have taken the girls to a friend's house to relax and unwind given the situation. Meanwhile, the police station was flooded with tips about potential sightings of Shannon and the girls, including various photographs. However, when asked to identify any of the individuals in the photos as his missing wife and daughters, Chris was unable to do so. Agent Coder also inquired about Chris and Shannon's marriage. Chris asserted that he had never been unfaithful to Shannon, and, to the best of his knowledge, Shannon had never been unfaithful to him either. He explained that they were the kind of couple who would confide in each other if they ever felt the urge to stray. Throughout the interview, Agent Coder observed Chris's unusual behavior, specifically his frequent hand movements towards his neck. This caught Agent Coder's attention and sparked his suspicion, leading him to wonder if these movements might be indicative of something more significant. During the interview, Agent Coder stepped out briefly to share his suspicion with the other officers that Chris might have strangled Shannon. As more time passed without any sign of Shannon or her daughters, worry and despair deepened among their loved ones. Despite their growing doubts about Shannon's safety, they clung to the hope that Bella and Cece might still be alive. Chris was released from the police department after 3 hours of questioning. However, the authorities asked him to return the next day, August 15th, for a polygraph test, and he agreed. On August 15th, Chris picked up his father from the airport and drove to the Frederick Police Department. Tammy Lee from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation administered the polygraph test. During the test, Chris denied knowing Shannon's whereabouts and claimed he had no role in her disappearance. He didn't pass the test, leaving detectives convinced of his involvement in the disappearance and deaths of his wife and daughters. However, they still needed to persuade him to confess. The special agent, Tammy Lee, a highly skilled coder and polygraph expert, confronted Chris about his failed polygraph test results. Chris admitted that he had not physically harmed Shannon, but acknowledged that he had caused her emotional suffering. Additionally, he confessed to having an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger. Chris expressed remorse for his infidelity, stating that he had never intended to engage in such behavior. However, he denied any involvement in the disappearance of his family. During the interview, Chris asked to speak with his father, Ronnie. The officers were initially hesitant, worried that allowing Ronnie into the room would prompt Chris to request legal representation. Despite their reservations, they allowed it, hoping Ronnie's presence might persuade Chris to confess. In the interrogation room, Chris confessed to killing Shannon, claiming he did it because she had supposedly harmed their daughters, Bella and Cece. However, Shannon's friends were certain Chris was lying, knowing that Shannon would never hurt her children, whom she loved deeply and was eager to welcome her new son, Nico. Chris admitted to burying Shannon's body in a shallow grave at one of his work sites and disposing of his daughters' bodies in oil tanks. Despite being arrested and taken into custody, he persisted in denying any harm to them. The detectives didn't believe for a second that Shannon had harmed her daughters. Chris pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the sentencing hearing, the judge made a bold statement about the heinous crime Chris had committed, calling it the most inhumane and vicious one he had encountered in his career, despite having dealt with thousands of cases. Years later, Chris confessed to murdering his wife Shannon in their bed. He had strangled her after she confronted him about his extramarital affair and threatened to take their daughters away. He then put her body in his truck and drove to his work site with their two daughters. There, Chris claimed to have killed his daughters, one by one, in a horrific sequence of events, where one daughter was forced to witness her sister's death before meeting the same fate. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sierra Jugan. Sierra Jugan was a young woman who captivated everyone with her joyful personality. Her happy and humorous nature made her the center of attention wherever she went. She had a lively, cheeky personality that brought immense happiness to those around her. Even when she made mistakes, she had a special way of making her mom smile. As Sierra entered high school, she continued to showcase her adventurous spirit. She boldly took on new experiences, including playing volleyball. Whether on or off the court, she displayed a remarkable level of comfort and confidence. On July 19, 2016, the Jen family returned from their vacation and began unpacking. Sierra was looking forward to the fall semester at the University of Tu, where she planned to study abroad. Her mom wanted to discuss her plans with her, but Sierra, being an athletic person, was eager to try out her new bike. So whenever she had the time, she was keen to take a ride. Before leaving the house, Sierra told her mom that she was heading to her boyfriend Josh's house. Her mom acknowledged her plans and told her she would see her later, around 1:05 p.m. Sierra looked cute, with her hair tied up in a ponytail, wearing shorts and a tank top as she set out on her ride. Josh, Sierra's boyfriend, called her home phone because he was worried about her whereabouts. He had tried calling her phone several times, but it kept going straight to voicemail. When Josh asked Sierra's mom if she was home, she said no. Josh told Sierra's mom that Sierra had left his house around 7 p.m., and he hadn't seen or heard from her since then. Sierra's mom knew something was wrong because Sierra always answered her phone. Her first thought was to call Sierra's grandparents who lived nearby, but they said Sierra wasn't with them. Sierra's family and Josh started searching for her, worried about her safety. Sierra's mom quickly got in her car and started driving around, looking carefully at every possible place Sierra could be, including the sides of the road. Sierra's aunt, uncle, and cousin also joined the search, thinking Sierra might have been in an accident and got hit by a car. As time went by, worry grew. The possibility of Sierra being hurt, maybe with a broken leg, weighed heavily on their minds. Despite their relentless efforts and exhaustive search, they couldn't find any trace of Sierra. When Sierra's mom got home, she immediately took to social media, reaching out to Sierra's friends, desperately hoping someone had seen or heard from her. But to her dismay, there was complete silence. Hours passed, and still, there was no sign of Sierra. Filled with worry, Sierra's mom knew every minute counted and decided to call the police. Just an hour later, a concerned neighbor called Sierra's family saying County Road 6 was blocked off. With their hearts racing, Sierra's family rushed out to see what was happening. They were met by a chaotic scene surrounded by officers who refused to let them through. The officers stayed tight-lipped about Sierra, leaving her mom in a state of panic. She couldn't help but wonder if the police had found her missing daughter. The small-town police officers, seeking answers, decided to seek the FBI's assistance. They promised to deliver any information they could to Sierra's family as soon as possible. Understandably, the family found themselves unable to sleep, remaining wide awake and contemplating their next course of action. The following day, Sierra's mom and aunt took matters into their own hands, refusing to wait for answers. Her mom made a series of calls to hospitals, desperately searching for any signs of an unidentified female patient that might be Sierra. Despite call after call, they turned up nothing, leaving them feeling increasingly hopeless. A lead emerged from Detroit, Michigan, offering a glimmer of hope in the search for Sierra. A young woman, bearing a striking resemblance to her, had been admitted to a hospital with severe injuries, including numerous broken bones, after escaping from a moving vehicle with no identification. In an effort to confirm her identity, a nurse asked Sierra's family to describe any distinguishing marks on her body. Sierra's mom recalled a scar on her calf and a pierced belly button, which seemed to match the hospitalized girl's features, raising the family's hopes that they had finally found Sierra. Unfortunately, their hopes were soon dashed when they discovered that the girl in the hospital was not Sierra, leaving the family devastated and heartbroken after investing so much hope and anticipation in the possibility. Later that morning, the police visited Sierra's house to brief them on the previous night's events. One of the officers had found a trampled cornfield near where he'd parked his car and approached the area. He noticed signs of a struggle and a motorcycle track inside the cornfield. Not wanting to disturb any potential evidence, he backed away without touching anything. As he retreated, he caught a glimpse of a reflection: Sierra's purple bike. Further investigation uncovered several items at the scene: a pair of men's sunglasses, a pair of women's sunglasses, a blood-stained sock, and a screwdriver. Based on these discoveries, the police concluded that Sierra was likely abducted from that location. During the investigation, detectives thoroughly questioned Sierra's friends and family to gather information about her boyfriend Josh. They learned that Sierra and Josh had been inseparable since they were 7 years old, and their friendship developed into a romantic relationship in their first year of high school. The couple was known for their energetic and carefree nature, sharing a passion for skiing, among other things. After high school, Sierra went to the University of Toledo, while Josh enrolled at Bowling Green, but despite the physical distance, their commitment to each other remained strong. They often talked about getting married in the future, although Sierra emphasized her priority on completing her education before settling down, showcasing her academic dedication. Detectives investigating the case found that Sierra had visited Josh's house in the early afternoon on July 19th. According to the gathered information, Sierra decided to leave Josh's house and head home around 6:30 p.m. Because he was worried about her safety, Josh joined Sierra on her ride home, riding alongside her on his motorcycle. After a few miles, Sierra told Josh to turn back and go home, wanting to ride her bike alone and prove her independence. Josh reluctantly agreed, and they parted ways, with Josh heading back on his motorcycle and Sierra continuing her ride. During the investigation, detectives discovered motorcycle tracks in the nearby corn stalks, not far from Sierra's bike. This raised the question of whether these tracks belonged to Josh's motorcycle, and detectives couldn't ignore the possible connection. They began a thorough investigation to determine if there was any evidence linking Josh to the scene where Sierra went missing. As a result, detectives set up a command post to gather all relevant clues about Sierra's disappearance. A promising lead emerged quickly. A local resident came forward, saying that on July 14th, while driving, he saw a motorcycle helmet on the side of the road. He asked his son to retrieve it and put it in their truck. Later, after learning about Sierra's disappearance, he examined the helmet more closely and found red stains, which he suspected were blood. The helmet was discovered near the cornfield where Sierra's bike was found. The detectives asked Josh about his helmet, and to their relief, he produced it, confirming he had it with him. Furthermore, they verified that Josh had returned home after the interview with his parents, ruling him out as a suspect due to his solid alibi. Despite being visibly shaken, Josh was not suspected by Sierra's family in connection with her disappearance. The detectives focused on identifying the owner of a blood-stained motorcycle helmet found on the roadside. Recognizing the significance of DNA evidence, they sent the helmet to the crime lab for testing, awaiting the results with anticipation, hoping for a breakthrough in their investigation. Community unites in search for Sierra, organizing parties to scour every area for clues. Townspeople work together, fueled by a deep sense of unity, to bring her home safely. Hundreds gather at a candlelight vigil, sending thoughts and prayers for her return. 2 days after Sierra vanished, the police got a tip about a suspicious van speeding through the area where she was last seen. People thought she might have been kidnapped and forced into sex trafficking. The tipster gave the police the van's license plate number. The police interviewed the van's owner, but it turned out the van had nothing to do with Sierra's disappearance. The owner explained that he sped up because another car suddenly appeared from behind, which might have been a family member looking for Sierra, and he panicked. By the 48-hour mark, the investigation had turned up no leads on Sierra's whereabouts. As time goes on, her family is struggling to stay hopeful. With each passing day, the chances of finding her alive get smaller and smaller. Despite trying to stay positive, the harsh reality of the situation is getting harder to ignore. The police went from door to door searching for Sierra, and their investigation eventually took them to a farm near where her bike was found. The farm, which covered an acre of land, had several buildings including a small house, a trailer, and a large barn. The owner of the property was James Worley. When the police arrived at the farm, they started talking to James Worley. They asked him about the day Sierra went missing, hoping he could tell them something about her disappearance. But what James said shocked them. He told them he had been out riding his motorcycle that day, but it broke down, and he lost some things along the way, including a screwdriver and his helmet. This was surprising because those were the same items found at the scene where Sierra was taken. By saying this, James had unintentionally put himself at the scene of the crime, which made the detectives very suspicious of him and his connection to Sierra's disappearance. The police were determined to delve deeper into their investigation, and they questioned James Worley. During the questioning, they noticed something that caught their attention: scratches on his face. It was clear that he had been involved in a struggle, and this discovery only increased their suspicions about him, raising more questions. The detectives wondered if these scratches were the result of a confrontation with the missing girl, Sierra. After questioning James Worley about Sierra's disappearance, the detectives returned to the police station. They decided to conduct a background check on him, hoping to uncover relevant information as they looked into his past. But what they discovered sent chills down their spines. James Worley had a dark criminal history, including a previous attempt to abduct a young woman 26 years earlier on July 4, 1989. The woman's name was Robin Garter. On July 4, 1989, 26-year-old Robin Garter was getting ready to attend a neighborhood picnic. While her mother was busy preparing potato salad and making final arrangements for the event, Robin decided to squeeze in a bike ride beforehand. However, she had forgotten to bring water and was now struggling with the intense heat. As she considered turning back home to quench her thirst, Robin heard the sound of a car approaching from behind. Robin thought that after the vehicle passed her, she would head back home. But before she could react, the car crashed into her bike, sending her flying into a nearby ditch. She was stunned and disoriented. The driver stopped and got out, looking concerned and trying to figure out what had happened. But then things took a dark turn. The person who had hit her suddenly revealed sinister intentions. Without warning, he hit her hard on the back of the head. As she struggled to understand what was happening, the attacker held a screwdriver to her throat, threatening to kill her in a menacing tone. He ordered her to get up and get into his car right away. The man forced Robin into his car at screwdriver point, trying to handcuff her once she was inside. He managed to cuff one wrist, but Robin fought back fiercely, preventing him from cuffing the other. She screamed for help at the top of her lungs, but her cries were drowned out by the empty cornfields, with no one around to hear her. Robin's fierce resistance against her attacker left her on the brink of unconsciousness multiple times, but she refused to give up. Just as the silence was becoming unsettling, she picked up the faint sound of a motorcycle in the distance. As she strained her eyes, she saw it approaching the car where her captor was. Realizing this might be her only chance to escape, Robin waved her arms wildly to get the rider's attention. Luckily, the rider noticed her distress signals and brought the motorcycle to a stop. In a desperate bid for help, Robin explained that the man was trying to kill her. Without hesitation, she seized the opportunity and quickly climbed onto the back of the motorcycle, leaving her captor and the car behind. The motorcycle rider drove Robin home, where she collapsed. Robin's mother called the police and an ambulance, and Robin was rushed to the hospital for medical treatment. The motorcyclist, determined to help the authorities, led the police back to the scene of the incident. To their surprise, they found James Worley still present, waiting with his car. When questioned, James was fully cooperative and provided identification to prove who he was. However, his version of events differed significantly from initial assumptions. James strongly denied any intention of kidnapping Robin. According to his account, Robin was riding her bike erratically, swerving into the road, making it impossible for him to avoid hitting her. James claimed that after the accident, Robin became hysterical, and he restrained her with handcuffs not to harm her, but to secure her to the steering wheel of his truck while he sought help. He insisted his actions were driven by genuine concern for Robin's well-being. James Worley was arrested in 1989 for trying to abduct Robin. He was found guilty of abduction and sentenced to 6 to 10 years in the state prison in Mansfield, Ohio. Due to good behavior, he was released 3 years later. When Robin found out that James was released, she was terrified. The fear of James potentially striking again weighed heavily on her mind. With information about James Worley's criminal history in hand, the police obtained a search warrant and went to his home. When they arrived, they started searching the house, which James shared with his mother. At first, everything seemed normal. Next, they turned their attention to the large backyard, methodically searching the outdoor area. The officers then discovered a barn located in the corner of the yard, which sparked their curiosity. They approached the structure cautiously. Inside the barn, the police found stacks of hay bales. They searched the barn carefully, looking for any evidence that might connect James to Cece's disappearance. The detectives examined every nook and cranny, checking each bale of hay for hidden items or clues. As they removed the bales of hay from James Worley's barn, The detectives noticed a small green crate in the corner. They approached it cautiously and opened it, finding bags of underwear, stockings, and tube tops. Each item was neatly labeled and sealed in a plastic Ziploc bag. As the detectives searched through the items, they were shocked to see a pair of purple panties with what looked like bloodstains. This discovery filled them with a sense of dread, and they wondered what other disturbing things they might find in their search of James Worley's barn. The detectives quickly spotted a piece of plywood on the ground and recognized its potential importance. They carefully lifted the plywood, exposing a small freezer buried in the barn. When they opened the freezer, they were met with a strong, unpleasant smell, similar to bleach, which heightened their suspicions. As they continued their investigation, they found other disturbing objects hidden behind hay bales, including a stained air mattress that hinted at a dark history. The presence of zip ties, duct tape, handcuffs, and keys added to their concerns, as these items are commonly used in abductions and other criminal activities. The detectives decided to send all the items taken from the property for DNA testing. Worley attempted to explain the items as part of a porn business he claimed to be planning, but the evidence against him was too strong to ignore. The combination of the disturbing discoveries at the crime scene and the incriminating items led to James's arrest for Sierra's murder. Sierra's family was stunned to learn that her abductor was someone who lived far away from her home. This news sparked a million questions in her mind, with the most pressing one being where she was. The detectives launched a thorough investigation of James's property, meticulously searching every inch of it and leaving no stone unturned. They brought in cadaver dogs to help detect any potential remains. The detectives focused on a pond on the property, recognizing its potential significance. They carefully drained it to uncover any evidence hidden beneath the water's surface. They also inspected the insulation in the front of the attic. As the investigation progressed, they extended their search to the neighboring properties, considering the possibility that evidence might have been dispersed beyond James's property. They pursued leads in all directions, diligence and thoroughness guiding their efforts. A farmer was walking through his vast field when he received a call. As he walked, he noticed a peculiar area of corn that was matted down and decided to take a closer look. When he approached the spot, he saw a nearby mound of dirt, which immediately made him think it could be a grave. This worried him even more because of the recent search for Sierra. With this on his mind, he quickly called the police, telling them about his suspicions and giving them the exact location. Responding promptly to the farmer's distress call, the police arrived at the scene. They noticed a fresh pile of dirt, which fueled their suspicion that it could be a grave. Taking the situation seriously, they began processing the area carefully to avoid disturbing any potential evidence. The officers examined every inch of the scene, hoping to find clues about Sierra's whereabouts. However, despite their thorough efforts, their search yielded no results. The detectives then searched the adjoining farms for Sierra, using drones and helicopters to cover a larger area and increase their chances of locating her. During their search, they found another mound of dirt with freshly matted corn. Their trained dogs detected the scent of decomposition, suggesting a potential crime scene. As the crime scene investigators dug, they made a grim discovery. They found human remains. Based on the evidence, it was believed to be Sierra's body. Tragically, her hands were bound behind her back, and her feet were tied to the handcuffs. Further examination revealed that an object was lodged in her mouth, restricting her airway, which ultimately led to her death. Later that night, the Sierra family received a devastating call they had been fearing. The police had found Sierra's lifeless body. The news was met with an overwhelming outpouring of grief as the entire family broke down in tears. The sorrow felt by each family member was palpable, and the weight of the moment was crushing. A month after Sierra's tragic abduction and murder, James Worley was charged with 19 counts, including kidnapping and aggravated murder. 2 years later, Worley's trial began. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, He pleaded not guilty to all charges. Over 8 intense days, the prosecution presented a gripping story that captivated the jury and spectators alike. After deliberating for 6 hours, the jury found Worley guilty on all counts related to Sierra's murder. The severity of the crime led to Worley being sentenced. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Carjan Oviedo. Rolando Angel Aquino was a charismatic individual who naturally drew people's attention. One day he caught the captivating gaze of Carjan Oviedo, a woman with a fiery passion for life and an infectious energy. They instantly connected, sharing similar interests and dreams, as well as a strong determination and entrepreneurial drive. This chance encounter led to a beautiful relationship that brought them true happiness. In 2016, the couple took the next step, moving in together and launching their own business, a warehouse, in their home. Carjan's keen eye for detail shone as she created a welcoming sign on one of the windows for customer service, alongside lists of items for sale. This was their pride and joy, a small but thriving venture. The people of Mañata watched this happy and driven couple with admiration and curiosity, wondering who they were and how they achieved so much. While many knew Carjan from her childhood, Rolando remained an enigma, with his past in Bolivia remaining a mystery to all. Rolando not only co-ran the business with Carjan, but he also worked at the Galeen Fair, where wholesale fruit sales took place. From the outside, it seemed like they had found their perfect life together, but even the strongest relationships can be put to the test. One day, Rolando was shocked to find Carjan in the car with another man. His initial reaction was anger, and in that moment, he almost destroyed the car's interior. Their picture-perfect relationship crumbled in a matter of minutes. However, Rolando decided to forgive and continue their relationship, choosing to move forward with the one he loved. To outsiders, they still appeared to be the ideal couple, capable of overcoming any obstacle together. Rolando Angel Aquino, born in 1987 in Bolivia, is an enigmatic figure. The exact date of his arrival in Argentina remains unknown, like many other aspects of his life. As the eldest of 7 children, Rolando learned the importance of family bonds and hard work from a young age. He dreamed of a happy family filled with joy and laughter. In his youth, he met Carolina Chavez, with whom he had a son. Despite their difficulties, the couple remained on good terms. Later in life, Rolando had a second son, Elias, with Soledad Guardio. Although his relationships with Soledad didn't work out, Rolando remained a devoted and caring father to his children. He maintained a warm relationship with the mothers of his children and stayed in touch with them. Rolando was a physically fit man who prioritized his health from a young age. He played sports and soccer for the local team to stay active. His colleagues and loved ones described him as kind, hardworking, and sociable. Although he got along well with his neighbors, Rolando had a unique charm when it came to socializing. Carjan was born on March 30, 1990, and grew up in Monado, where she and Rolando later set up their warehouse. The locals knew her as an outgoing and open-minded woman. Like Rolando, Carjan longed for a happy and successful family life with a loving and devoted partner. However, it took her some time to find the right person to build her happiness with. Carjan had 2 daughters from previous relationships before meeting Rolando. One of her former partners, Rule O.A., was the father of one of the girls, and she married him in 2013. However, their marriage was troubled and eventually headed for a breakdown. Rule claimed that financial struggles were one of the main reasons for their conflicts. Feeling anxious about his life and seeking better opportunities, Rule left his family under the pretense of buying something essential, fleeing the city and moving abroad to avoid being traced. By the summer of 2019, 9-year-old Elias was living with Rolando and Carjan. They had made plans to spend quality time together in the coming months. However, on the morning of July 12, 2019, Rolando found Elias unwell when he went to wish him good morning before leaving for work. Concerned, Rolando took Elias to the children's hospital to see a pediatrician. After an examination, the doctors determined that Elias's condition was critical, and he was rushed to the intensive care unit. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, Elias tragically passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital. The remarkable thing about Elias's death was that he had been in perfect health when he left home, showing no unusual symptoms, and seemed equally well when he arrived at his father's house. However, the medical report was shocking. It revealed that Elias had died from severe poisoning, which caused his organs to fail and a blood clot in his brain. This news left Elias's parents stunned, as they could not understand how their active and healthy son could have suddenly died from such a mysterious illness. As part of their professional duty, the doctors recommended further forensic investigation. However, Elias's mother and grandmother were too grief-stricken to consider this, and they refused. The funeral home Karjan suggested cremating the body, but Elias's mother declined, preferring to bury her son in a private cemetery where she could visit his grave and lay flowers. Elias's sudden death shattered Rolando's heart, leaving him devastated by the loss of his youngest son. Karjan, who was caring and loving, stood by him every step of the way, never leaving his side. She took charge of all their business affairs, providing him with gentle support and helping him navigate his pain and grief. As time passed, the warmth and love from the woman he cherished gradually eased his suffering. 16 months after the tragedy, Rolando took a major step and proposed to Karjan, and they got married, with Rolando convinced she'd always be by his side. However, their happiness was short-lived. On February 6, 2022, Karjan returned home from a beauty salon and gym visit, and the next day, February 7th, she noticed Rolando was experiencing serious health issues. A medical ambulance was called to their home, as Rolando, 35, suddenly felt very ill after vomiting profusely and collapsed in their living room. The housekeeper called for emergency medical help. At the Santa Maria Clinic, doctors allowed Karjan to see her husband, but his condition was critical. Despite the medical staff's efforts, Rolando passed away on February 9th. The cause of death was severe poisoning, which raised questions among the medical staff, given Rolando was a healthy and active sportsman. Rolando's wife, Karjan, revealed that he was taking medication to treat dark skin spots. However, this information raised red flags among specialists. Upon further investigation, tests disclosed an abnormal amount of calcium oxalate crystals in Rolando's system, a telling sign of ethylene glycol poisoning, a key ingredient in car antifreeze. The sudden and mysterious death of Rolando sparked a high-priority investigation by the authorities. The prosecutor's office launched a thorough inquiry into the neighborhood where the Aquino couple resided. Neighbors became crucial witnesses, reporting that Karjan had frequently administered her husband unknown medication. They knew she used these drugs to attend a party without her husband. Nevertheless, neighbors also expressed concerns about Rolando's son, leading investigators to consider the possibility that Karjan intended to sedate her husband temporarily rather than kill him. The Technology Crimes Unit officers' findings completely dismissed the idea that Rolando's death was accidental. They requested forensic examinations and questioned Karjan, Rolando's wife, thoroughly. However, during the interrogation, Karjan's responses were contradictory. The officers asked her to identify the substance she had given her husband before he died, and she claimed it was a skin blemish remedy that she had administered through an IV. When they asked her to produce a vial of the solution, Karjan said the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, had already thrown it away. But when the officers interviewed Claudia, she denied Karjan's statement about the discarded vial. Claudia also revealed that she had overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with his medication. Karjan was detained, and her cell phone was seized as part of the investigation. The news of Rolando's death shocked his family, friends, and teammates. Those who regularly visited the Aquino couple's warehouse and other locals were also stunned. Everyone struggled to understand what had happened and why the family's father had died so suddenly. Rolando's ex-husband was shocked when rumors started circulating that Carjan had deliberately poisoned him. The ex-husband described Carjan as always being affectionate and never violent towards him. However, an investigation into Carjan's phone revealed that she had searched online for information on the most deadly poisons and ways to erase her search history. Furthermore, records showed that she had ordered ethylene glycol twice from an online store. According to the Agency for Toxic Substances and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, ethylene glycol is a synthetic substance used in antifreeze production, which is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely toxic to humans. Based on forensic evidence and other clues, the prosecutor's office accused Carjan of intentionally poisoning Rolando by mixing the substance with orange juice, which severely damaged his health and ultimately led to his death. A series of strange and tragic events in the Aquino family prompted the authorities to take drastic action. Suspicions arose over the cause of 9-year-old Elias's death, leading to a new investigation. The prosecutor's office launched a detailed probe into the boy's medical history. According to his mother, Elias was healthy and active until he suddenly slipped into a coma at his father's house, never to recover. However, the death certificate stated that the cause was a malfunction of his internal systems and cerebral thrombosis. Investigators doubted that a healthy 9-year-old could have died from such causes. The prosecutor's office requested information on possible ethylene glycol purchases and received a response confirming that Carjan had bought the poison on July 2, 2019, shortly before Elias arrived at the Aquino home. Relatives also confirmed that Carjan insisted on cremating Elias's body, but the birth mother refused, preferring to bury her son. The gathered evidence was sufficient for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file new aggravated murder charges against Carjan on March 4th, related to Elias's poisoning. On March 14th, a judge ordered Carjan's pretrial detention, which she tried to appeal, but the judge rejected, ruling that she should remain in custody until the trial began. The highly anticipated trial commenced on November 28, 2022, at the Mendoza Criminal Court, drawing widespread public and media interest. 2 pending indictments were being addressed, one led by prosecutor Fernando Guzzo, focusing on the murder of Elias, and the other involving Claudia Rios, related to the murder of Rolando. Carjan's defense team sought to counter the charges, claiming that Rolando had a history of violence and abuse, and that there was insufficient reliable evidence to support the allegations. They emphasized that Carjan lacked a motive for the murders, pointing out that she was the sole owner of the house, cars, and business. The defense also argued that the charges against Carjan were unfounded and suggested that her partner might have purchased antifreeze by hacking into her account. Additionally, Carjan claimed to have an alibi for February 6th, the day her husband was poisoned, as she was not at home when he began experiencing health problems. After the initial phase of the trial, the defendant, dubbed the Guatemalan poisoner by the media, was given the opportunity to speak. Emotionally, Carjan denied committing the heinous crime, stating that it was extremely distressing for her to be accused of something she did not do, especially considering she was a mother to 2 young daughters. The court hearing continued, with a focus on witness testimony that brought new aspects of the case to light. The prosecution questioned Carjan, targeting key points. Specifically, they asked her if she had suggested cremating her son Rolando. Carjan responded firmly that the decision wasn't hers to make, and she never made such a suggestion. Next, the prosecution called relatives of the deceased to testify, providing more details about what happened. Soledad Elias's mother took the stand, telling the court that after her son's death, Rolando told her that Carjan had suggested cremating Elias's body so that both families could keep the boy's ashes. However, Soledad rejected the idea. She also shared her memories of meeting Rolando at the cemetery, where he mentioned Carjan's jealousy. According to her, Carjan and Rolando's relationship was troubled to the point where they even slept in separate beds. Carolina, the mother of Rolando's first child, was another witness. She stated that her ex-husband Rolando and Karjan slept in separate rooms, although she had never interacted with Karjan before the incident. However, on the morning of February 8th, Karjan called Carolina to inform her that Rolando was ill and hospitalized. Karjan claimed that Rolando had probably taken some medication and was feeling unwell, and asked Carolina to help her unlock Rolando's cell phone, suspecting that he was seeing another woman. Carolina was shocked to hear about Rolando's condition, as they had met just a few days prior and he seemed fine. When she arrived at the hospital, Karjan was already there, talking to the doctors. Carolina was not allowed to enter, so she waited outside. As she was leaving, Karjan told her that everyone else had left, which made Carolina suspicious. She demanded an explanation from the doctors, who told her that Rolando had lost consciousness and was not responding to treatment. Carolina then complained to the hospital secretary and later spoke to Karjan, who claimed that Rolando had taken medication for skin blemishes, which caused an allergic reaction. According to Karjan, the medication bottle was no longer available because the housekeeper had thrown it away. The accumulation of these details only served to deepen the mystery surrounding this complex case. As the trial progressed, medical professionals and experts took the stand to present crucial forensic evidence, as well as the findings of a comprehensive psychological examination. This new evidence shed light on previously overlooked details that had gone unnoticed until then. Dr. Ivana Marinelli, a pediatrician at the hospital, recalled Elias's hospitalization in July 2019. At the time, Elias was rushed to the hospital with severe breathing problems and required immediate intubation. A CT scan revealed a severe blood clot in his brain. Elias received intensive care, and Dr. Marinelli confirmed that his symptoms matched those of ethylene glycol poisoning. These symptoms included impaired consciousness, restlessness, and eventually a coma, accompanied by a blood clotting disorder. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Elias's condition deteriorated, and at 5 p.m. on July 12th, he suffered cardiac and respiratory arrest. Medical personnel, including his father, attempted to resuscitate Elias for 50 minutes, but unfortunately, all efforts were in vain, and he was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. The jury reviewed the results of Karjan's psychological evaluation, which was conducted at the request of the prosecution. The experts' findings indicated that Karjan was dishonest and hid the truth, projecting an image of decency while actually being cold and cruel. Notably, a psychological examination was conducted shortly after her husband's death, but it revealed no emotional impact from the loss, raising questions about her sincerity and reinforcing her portrayal as a self-centered woman. The examiners also detected signs of hidden hostility and impulsive behaviors in Karjan. The prosecutor questioned Karjan's claim of being a victim of gender-based violence, as she had described in her testimony. This information collectively painted a detailed psychological portrait of the defendant. After weeks of tense anticipation and continuous court proceedings, the trial finally reached its conclusion. The packed courtroom was filled with people, their eyes fixed anxiously on the jury and the judge, awaiting the verdict that would bring justice to this complex and tragic case. The prosecutor asked the jury to convict Karjan, emphasizing that the evidence pointed to her as the mastermind and perpetrator of both murders. She bought ethylene glycol, got rid of the packaging, and made it look like regular juice. As a result, her loved ones suffered and died without her assistance. The prosecution and the plaintiff urged the jury to deliver a unanimous guilty verdict, insisting it was the only way to achieve justice. They wanted Karjan to be convicted of murder with evidence of extreme cruelty. In contrast, the defense argued that there wasn't enough evidence to prove their client's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They claimed that a person's character, good or bad, doesn't necessarily determine their involvement in a crime, and that for their client, the deaths of Rolando and his son were a devastating tragedy. Despite the defense's arguments, Karjan joined the notorious ranks of Argentine criminals who poisoned their victims. After a lengthy silence and a tense wait for the verdict, the jury delivered their decision. In a unanimous verdict, they found Karjan guilty of murdering Elias and committing the crime with exceptional cruelty. Additionally, they convicted her of Rolando's aggravated death, which was caused by an insidious procedure. Karjan, dressed in black with white beads around her neck, remained expressionless as she heard the verdict. The jury's guilty verdict resulted in her receiving a life sentence in prison. Karjan, the defendant, attempted to evade punishment for the treacherous murders that shocked society and left many unanswered questions. Her plan to cremate the victims' bodies may have been her final attempt to avoid the punishment she deserved. Nevertheless, the court and jury remained unmoved by her tactics and delivered a just verdict. Why did Karjan kill her loved ones? This question remains unanswered, a mystery that continues to baffle. On the surface, she had everything one could ask for to be happy. Yet perhaps the root of her motive lay hidden in the recesses of her own soul, driven by jealousy, self-interest, or an inflated sense of pride. Despite the heinous nature of her crime, Karjan refused to acknowledge her guilt, leaving the true motives behind this dark act unclear. Now, as Canova faces a lengthy prison sentence, she will have ample time to reflect on the dark forces that may have consumed her, ultimately destroying not only her own life, but also those around her. This tragic tale serves as a poignant reminder that even in the closest of relationships, terrible secrets and mysteries can lurk beneath the surface, and that true love and loyalty must always be our guiding principles. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of the Buchanan family. Molly met Adam Buchanan, a divorced father of one, when she applied for an office manager position at his company. At the time, Adam was raising his son Nolan from a previous marriage on his own. Molly, a cheerful and sociable blonde, immediately caught the attention of the company owner, and the interest was mutual. They started a romance, which turned into a serious relationship, and Molly eventually moved in with Adam. Molly, who dreamed of a loving and friendly family, made an effort to build a strong bond with her stepson Nolan. Soon, she became pregnant, and they had a son named Gavin. Those who knew the Buchanans described them as a close-knit family of four. Adam, who owned a construction company, earned a comfortable living, and the family even purchased a vacation property in El Dorado County, California, a small cabin on 19 acres in Greenwood. The cabin was rustic with no electricity, water, sewer, or gas, but Adam, being in the construction business, actively worked on remodeling it, and the family frequently visited the cabin. On September 13, 2015, at 10 a.m., the Garden Valley Fire Department responded to a wildfire in Greenwood Township, western El Dorado County, on Highway 193 between Coloma and Georgetown. Upon arrival, they found that the fire had destroyed 10 acres of the property, and the cabin had burned to the ground, with charred remains in the ashes. The fire department personnel left the scene untouched. At 11 a.m., firefighters alerted the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office to the fire scene, unsure of what they were dealing with. Initially, they suspected a pet might be trapped inside the house. However, upon arriving, the coroner faced a challenging situation. The house was still smoldering, making it impossible to inspect the interior. They had to wait for the flames to die down and the temperature to decrease. Once the coroner could examine the house, they detected the pungent smell of burnt flesh and soon discovered a human skull and charred torso. It became apparent that the tragedy had claimed a life. The officer called for backup, and additional officers from the sheriff's office arrived to conduct a meticulous investigation of the scene. The evidence led to an obvious conclusion: the isolated cabin, located in a remote area, was not the primary residence of its owners, but rather a vacation retreat. A Dodge truck and trailer were found on the adjacent property, and running the license plates could identify the owner. It was possible that the owner was the wildfire victim. It was quickly discovered that the vehicle and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, a company owned by Adam Buchanan. Buchanan, the owner, lived 160 miles away from the accident scene, a 3-hour drive from Bonita, California. This information supported the police's initial assumption that the house served as a country retreat for city dwellers who vacationed there to escape the hustle and bustle. It remained unclear who was inside, the company's owner, Mr. Buchanan, or someone else. The detectives began their investigation with the owner's name as their first clue. The Bonita police officer's task was to verify that all of Buchanan's family members were safe and at home. At the correct address, the officers arrived at the Buchanan's driveway, where they noticed a white Ford pickup truck. When they knocked on the door, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage answered, looking surprised, and asked what had brought them to his doorstep. To avoid alarming the household, the officers decided to first establish who was present in the house. They didn't want to assume that the company car's disappearance was necessarily linked to the owner himself. It could have been taken by someone else from the company. Nolan Buchanan informed the officers that his father, Adam, had left for the weekend to his country estate, 160 miles away, with his partner Molly and their 8-year-old son Gavin, and they were expected to return in the evening. According to Nolan, his father had entrusted him with taking care of the house. Although the remains found in the cabin were not yet confirmed to be those of the Buchanans, the information gathered and the discovery of 2 sets of remains by the evening of September 13th were enough to declare the family missing. The El Dorado County Police visited Nolan's home on September 14th to question him further and determine who had perished in the fire. However, they were met by Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan, who explained that their son, the cabin's owner, regularly visited the property to perform his own repairs. The parents were extremely worried, having been unable to contact their son or daughter-in-law until then. The officers learned that the house relied on generators for power, but it had no electricity at the time of the incident. The presence of gas cylinders inside the cabin led to 2 possible theories. The fire could have been either an accident or intentional. By Sept 15th, investigators collected evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit, which changed the case's direction. A skull with a bullet hole was found, revealing a homicide, not an accidental fire. Forensic DNA testing showed the bullet was lodged in the victim's thigh. The skull belonged to a child, making murder the primary focus. The fire was intentionally set to destroy evidence. Next, investigators sought to determine the circumstances. Burglary gone wrong, family suicide, or a grudge against Adam Buchanan of Buchanan Construction? Investigators pursued the theory that Molly's murder was a crime of passion, examining her life for enemies and her marriage for clues. As leads dried up, they focused on the troubled relationship, marked by abuse, sleeping apart, and intense arguments. Molly's mother feared they'd kill each other, yet Molly stuck with Adam, briefly fleeing with their son. The couple enjoyed hunting near home, where guns were common. Police suspected another fight escalated. One spouse shot the other, then took their own life. However, an inconsistency emerged. If the tragedy was caused by a conflict between the husband and wife, logic dictates that the instrument of the crime would be found near the remains of one of them. But this was not the case. Investigators theorized that the weapon might have been damaged in the fire, making it less conspicuous than expected. Over 5 days, forensic team members meticulously sifted through the ashes in the home, conducting a meticulous search. Despite their thoroughness, they did not find the expected result. No weapons were discovered in the house. By this time, the forensic examination results were in. The examination confirmed that the DNA of the bodies matched Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds prior to the fire, and the angle of the bullet wounds ruled out the possibility of suicide. The lack of firearms suggested that a 4th person, unknown until then, was present in the house, shot the Buchanans, and the investigation had to start anew. Police had no option but to turn to 16-year-old Nolan, the son of the deceased. Nolan informed the officers that his family had driven away in an old Dodge truck. According to Nolan, his father chose to use the company vehicle instead of his personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway, because the truck and trailer were already loaded with rocks to decorate the area around his country cabin. This was the truck that police found near the burned structure. When questioned about why he didn't accompany his relatives on vacation, Nolan reiterated that he had to stay behind to take care of the house and garden while his father and stepmother were away. Nolan also mentioned that there was a neighbor growing illegal marijuana on the edge of the Buchanan property, which had led to frequent arguments between his father and the neighbor, with his father demanding that the neighbor stop planting it and threatening to report the issue to the police. When discussing the family business, Nolan revealed the company's financial struggles, including downsizing and a significant reduction in employees from what his father had mentioned. The business debts were accumulating rapidly. The investigation now had valuable information and a suspect, specifically a neighbor, given the common link between violent crime and illegal drug cultivation in that area. The detectives believed the threat of reporting to the police could have led to the murder of Buchanan and his family. However, the issue was that they didn't know which neighbor they should focus on. After the family's murder, the financial crisis engulfing their business had to be addressed. On September 18th, the police visited Adam's company and questioned the employees. As Nolan had warned, the company was in dire straits, teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, with debts exceeding $30,000. As a result, some employees lost their jobs. Interestingly, some of the fired employees were bitterly unhappy with their dismissal and could potentially be suspects in the crime. During a community cleanup, students found a purse with Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan's IDs and a .22 caliber rifle hidden nearby. This led detectives to a new theory. The killer used the rifle and took their documents to cover tracks. The discovery was crucial because it suggested that the killer had gone to great lengths to reach Greenwood, murder the family, and then return to Bonita to get rid of the evidence. This suggested that the killer was likely a local resident of Bonita. The fact that the evidence was found near the location of Buchanan construction reinforced the theory that the boss was killed by a disgruntled employee. Detectives sent the gun and the bag of documents to be examined and requested a warrant to search the company's records and premises. Here, during the search, they discovered a video surveillance camera installed on the firm's premises, which was directed not at the company's territory, but at the center of the parking lot. Since it was known that the family had gone out of town on Friday, the investigators reviewed Friday's footage and were surprised to find that Adam had attached a trailer filled with rocks to a white Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had initially told them. This discovery revealed that Adam had deliberately misled the investigation. If the white Ford had towed the rock trailer to the cabin, then someone must have driven it back and parked it in the driveway of the Buchanan family home. Investigators decided to re-interview Nolan, aiming to keep him safe while gathering as much information as possible. This time, they asked him specific questions, such as what movie he had seen at the cinema, how he had paid for shopping at the mall, and how he had paid for dessert on a date. Unaware of the implications, Nolan mentioned that he had used his father's credit card. The officers then applied for a warrant to search the Buchanan home in Bonita, search their vehicles, and examine their financial records. The Ford automobile sat in the driveway, its wheels caked with reddish soil, similar to that found in Greenwood. This suggested that the car had recently been driven on the dirt roads of Greenwood. If the Ford had been used for a trip earlier, some soil might have remained on the wheels, but it wouldn't have been as noticeable. Unfortunately, the fire had destroyed any wheel tread marks near the country house, but the dirt buildup indicated that the car had probably been to Greenwood recently. Further investigation revealed that Adam Buchanan had used his credit card on Friday, September 11th, at a Taco Bell fast food chain on his way to Greenwood. However, Nolan claimed he stayed home and didn't accompany his parents, and that he had the credit card in his possession. Detectives reviewed the security cameras at the diner and saw what they expected: a white Ford, not a truck. When they searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt dated September 11th that listed 4 drinks, not 3. Similarly, evidence collected at the scene of the fire pointed to 4 drink cups, indicating that Nolan had been in the car. On Saturday, September 12th, Adam and Molly used a credit card at the Valencia Club Bar in Penn, about 30 minutes from the cabin. This was a familiar spot for the couple, as they would often stop by after working on the cabin. Security cameras at the bar recorded the time they left, and traffic cameras on the highway helped track their route back to the cabin. The cameras showed that a Ford F-150, driven by Adam and Molly, headed towards the Buchanan cabin around 2:30 a.m. on the day of the fire. Then at 3:30 a.m., the same vehicle was spotted driving in the opposite direction, but this time with only Nolan inside. Later that morning, on Sunday, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used to make purchases at 3 different businesses in Bonita: Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. The bank confirmed that Adam only had 1 credit card, which contradict Nolan's previous statements. By the time the forensic results were back, Nolan's fingerprints were found on the gun, leading to his arrest in the middle of a high school class. Nolan Buchanan maintained he was not guilty of the charges against him, and instead, he spun a tale claiming his father had shot the family, then pointed a rifle at him. Nolan said he took the weapon away in self-defense, accidentally shooting his father in the process. Nolan attributed his subsequent actions, including setting the house on fire, to a state of panic and extreme fear. Throughout the trial, the defense emphasized Adam's history of abuse towards Nolan and other family members. However, the medical examiner questioned the verdict due to the inconsistent angle of the bullet wound on Gavin's skull, suggesting it was fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. Nolan countered that he and his brother's beds were adjacent, and they were both awakened by the noise and screaming. He claimed to have seen someone enter the bedroom and shoot Gavin, then pointed the rifle at him. According to Nolan, he pushed the attacker away, which would have resulted in a shot fired at around a 45 degrees angle, contradicting the forensic evidence. The prosecution's theory is that Nolan killed his brother when they were alone in the house, while their parents were out at a bar. After waiting for his father and stepmother to return, Nolan shot and killed them as well, as evidenced by the position of the bodies. The sequence of events suggests that Adam was killed first, followed by Molly. Next, Nolan took the rifle, his parents' papers, doused the bodies with gasoline, and set the house on fire. He then went home, met up with his girlfriend, and spent the day with her, thereby establishing an alibi for himself. On July 13, 2018, a jury delivered a guilty verdict on 3 counts of first-degree murder against Nolan. As a result, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In announcing the sentence, Judge Kingsbury acknowledged the verbal and physical abuse Nolan had suffered, as well as the testimony that he killed his brother to spare him from further suffering at their father's hands. However, she also highlighted the premeditation of the crime, the subsequent arson, the creation of alibis, and Nolan's plans to take over the family business, which he had shared with relatives. The judge referenced Nolan's failure to comply with rules and erratic behavior, as reported by staff at the South Lake Tahoe Juvenile Treatment Center, where he was sent following his arrest. The judge informed Nolan that he, like anyone, has the opportunity to reform, and that if he exhibits good behavior, he may be eligible for parole in 25 years. Despite this, Nolan maintains his innocence, and if he is eventually granted parole, he will be required to pay a substantial amount of compensation to the victims, the exact sum of which has not yet been determined. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of the Winkler family. On March 22, 2006, The small town of Selmer, Tennessee was shaken when it received terrible news. 31-year-old Pastor Matthew Winkler was brutally murdered in his own home, and his wife Mary and their 3 daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Mary Eliza, and 1-year-old Brianna, vanished without a trace. That evening, Matthew failed to attend the Church of Christ service with his family, which was out of character for the responsible pastor, who always informed others if he needed to miss an event. What's more, none of the family members answered their phone, which added to the growing unease. Concerned community members decided to visit the Winklers' residence to investigate and offer help if needed. When they arrived, the house appeared normal, with no signs of forced entry or anything suspicious. Inside, lights were on in several rooms, and a television was playing loudly in one room, giving the impression that the family was simply busy with their daily activities. The front door was locked, and despite knocking, no one responded. Phone calls also went unanswered. Through the curtained windows, it was impossible to determine if anyone was inside or what was happening. Although the situation was extremely unusual, no one was eager to contact the police. Instead, a community elder was called, and they advised searching for a spare key to let themselves in. An hour and a half later, community members finally entered the house and discovered an unsettling scene. Everything inside was in order, with no signs of intrusion, but the owners were missing. The scene seemed normal until they entered the master bedroom, where they found the pastor's lifeless body lying on the floor in a pool of blood. A massive gunshot wound in his back had caused blood to spatter everywhere, and dried blood foam covered his face. The body had already gone cold and stiff, indicating that Matthew had likely been killed that morning, as he was still dressed in his pajamas. The police conducted a forensic examination of the body and determined that the pastor was killed by a single shot to the back from a large caliber weapon. He died shortly after being wounded due to massive blood loss and was unable to call for help. It was impossible to establish whether any strangers were in the house at the time of the murder, as the people who arrived before the police had destroyed all evidence. The crime scene was unusual, and those who could provide information about what happened had disappeared. The fate of the pastor's wife and daughters remained unknown. The police suspected that they might have been kidnapped or also killed. In addition, the family minivan, a Winkler, was missing from the garage. A massive search was launched, and the state issued a yellow alert, which meant that children were missing. All citizens were asked to be vigilant and assist in the search. Matthew Brian Winkler was born on November 21, 1974, in Henderson, Tennessee, a picturesque country town. As the youngest of 3 sons, he grew up with his brothers James and Daniel in a conservative Christian family. Their parents, Dan and Diane Winkler, were very religious and raised their sons in a strict and obedient environment. Notably, Matthew followed in the footsteps of his ancestors, becoming a minister in the 5th generation. His father, great-uncle Michael, grandfather Wendell, great-grandfather Merlin Winkler, and great-great-grandfather Merlin Paul Winkler Sr. were all preachers of the gospel at some point. His father, who ran the local preacher's school, was a respected and influential figure in their hometown. The Winkler brothers attended Sunday school and actively participated in church activities during their younger years. In high school, Matthew showed a serious interest in soccer, and everyone who saw him play noted his talent, predicting he could become an outstanding athlete of world renown. However, he later decided to sacrifice a promising sports career in favor of Bible study and church ministry. After completing school, Matthew's family lived in Austin, a small city in Texas. Although he was a creative person with a strong charisma, he did not have any exceptional academic achievements to his credit. After graduating from high school, he enrolled in Freed-Hardeman College and completed his studies successfully. While pursuing his college education, Matthew also started his ministerial career under his father's guidance. He served as the youth minister at the Central Church of Christ in McMinnville. Later, he was appointed to the preaching position at the 4th Street Church of Christ in Selmer, Tennessee. Mary Carol Winkler was born in 1973 in Tennessee to a deeply religious family. Her sister Patricia, born premature, suffered from cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and mental retardation. Despite her condition, Mary was very close to Patricia, caring for her with kindness. Tragedy struck in 1987 when Patricia died in a bathtub after an epileptic seizure. Mary was devastated, blaming herself for not being there to prevent it. Teachers were concerned about Mary's well-being due to her deplorable state, so they sent her to see the school psychologist, who provided her with help. However, when her father found out, he caused a scene and prohibited his daughter from continuing the sessions, insisting that family issues should only be discussed within the family. In reality, Mary never received genuine emotional support from her parents. As a result, Mary grew up to be modest and extremely shy, always trying to avoid conflicts. After the tragic death of her little sister, Mary became withdrawn. Because her father refused to let her seek professional help, the unresolved trauma accumulated over the years, ultimately leading to severe psychological problems. Following Patricia's death, Mary's parents decided to adopt Scarlet, a young girl from a troubled and large family. Soon, they were also granted custody of Scarlet's 2 brothers and sister, and the siblings were reunited in their new home. Mary, once again, took on the role of the older sister, caring for the younger children and assisting her mother. Matthew and Mary Winkler met shortly after Matthew's high school graduation. Despite his popularity among girls, due to his athletic build and handsome features, Matthew's strict religious upbringing kept him from getting too caught up in romantic entanglements. They quickly developed a strong connection, which soon blossomed into a deep love for each other. This was the first intense emotional experience for both of them, and after a few months, they introduced each other to their parents. With their parents' blessing, they began making wedding plans. They tied the knot in April 1994. When their first child, Patricia, was born, Matthew was still in college and had to take a temporary break from his studies. He got a job at a construction site but didn't last long due to his inability to cope with the physical demands. During this period, Matthew's volatile personality began to emerge. He would often get irritable and angry over small things and sometimes struggled to control his temper. However, Mary chose not to complain or share their family issues with others. As a meek and obedient young woman, raised in a patriarchal environment, she followed her husband's lead in every aspect. At first, Mary's family lived close to her parents' house, allowing her to visit them often. However, Mrs. Freeman, Mary's mother, was soon diagnosed with cancer, which progressed rapidly and took her life within a few months. This was another devastating blow for Mary, who was left to care for her younger siblings. To make matters worse, Mary was pregnant again at the time. Shortly after giving birth to her second daughter, the family relocated to a new city, where they purchased a small house of their own. After the move, Mary became fully devoted to caring for her newborn, and as a result, her relationships with her father and younger siblings began to deteriorate as they required constant attention. Furthermore, Mary struggled with severe postpartum depression. Everyone familiar with the Winkler family noticed Mary's peculiarities. She was introverted and even socially anxious, avoiding interaction with others. Forming new connections, let alone friendships, was a struggle for her. Her mood would shift frequently, and she was prone to melancholy, with even the smallest thing capable of moving her to tears. As Matthew's pastor career advanced, Mary became increasingly withdrawn. The situation grew more complicated when she became pregnant again, only to learn months later that the fetus had died. This devastating news deeply disturbed Mary, who had been eagerly anticipating the child and dreaming of a large, loving family. It took 2 years for her to see the long-awaited positive pregnancy test, and her joy was overwhelming. However, this time around, Mary concealed her pregnancy for a long time, as if fearful of something. Mrs. Winkler's strange behavior stemmed from childhood trauma and an unhealthy upbringing. Her husband, the family head, was authoritarian, demanding obedience. Behind the facade of a perfect couple, he was violent, often yelling at her without reason. The rumors of the pastor's cruelty spread after Mary appeared with a black eye. Matthew's urge for role-playing and adult toys clashed with Mary's conservative upbringing. She resisted, enraging him, and he tried to force his desires. After abuse, Mary confided in a friend who betrayed her trust, fueling rumors about the clergyman's behavior. Matthew was denied a church leadership promotion and forced to step down from teaching Sunday school due to unfavorable rumors about his personal preferences. His family had to relocate to a new city, where they started fresh. In Selmer, Matthew became a pastor again, and his wife took a part-time job. Despite challenges, they earned the admiration and respect of their community, seen as an exemplary couple and model family. The Winkler family and their neighbors became close friends, often visiting and sharing holidays. Months before the tragedy, Mary bragged about her husband buying a gun for self-defense and taking her to the shooting range. She learned quickly and accurately hit targets. It came out that the Winklers already had guns at home, bought by the pastor for self-defense, which puzzled the guests since they lived in a peaceful town with no enemies. After another move, the couple's financial situation became precarious. Mary sought out various part-time jobs and decided to pursue a medical degree, aiming to work in a clinic and help children in need. However, she soon turned to financial fraud to improve their family's financial standing. Mary later claimed she didn't realize her actions were illegal and intended to pay back the money once she got back on her feet. What Mary did is commonly known as artificially inflating account balances. She received checks from unknown sources, deposited them into a joint bank account with her husband, and then changed the account address so that all communications would be sent there. The total amount of checks received was nearly $177,000, which raised suspicions among bank employees. They invited the couple to the bank branch to clarify the situation, but the Winklers never showed up, further fueling suspicion. Although it was assumed that Matthew was unaware of his wife's actions after his death, Mary tried to convince the court that the fraud was his idea and that he had forced her to make shady transactions while he remained in the background to avoid detection. Mary's disappearance sparks suspicion. Her family's in danger after her husband's murder, and she's initially seen as a victim. But after neighbors' accounts and fraud evidence, she becomes the prime suspect. Authorities must find her, her kids, and the family car to ensure their safety. They're tracing her bank transactions and cell phone signal. Mary was discovered the following day in an Alabama resort town, where she was enjoying quality time with her children at a local amusement park. Apparently, she had planned a special day for them, aware that her impending imprisonment would separate her from her daughters for an extended period. Upon being taken to the police station to provide statements, they recounted a consistent and confident narrative. They claimed that intruders had broken into their home, assaulting their father, and their mother had armed herself to protect them. According to the girls, they were then forced to flee for their safety. Their father was still alive and in the hospital, and they were about to visit him. However, Patricia and Maria Eliza did not witness the events that unfolded in the house. All they knew was that they heard a gunshot, caught a glimpse of their father lying on the floor, and then their mother quickly got them into the car and they drove away. Mary soon began to confess, but claimed she couldn't recall the exact sequence of events due to a temporary memory lapse. According to her, her husband had been abusing her for years, humiliating her and pressuring her into intimate acts that went against her wishes. Mary maintained that it was he who had initiated the financial fraud she had committed. Matthew was known for demanding absolute obedience, had a short temper, and had a history of physical violence, as confirmed by his secretary at his previous job. The woman had frequently witnessed the pastor belittle his wife, who would carefully bring him lunch to church, only to be met with dissatisfaction. The evening before the tragic event, A scandal erupted in the family, prompting the couple to sleep in separate rooms. Mary was distraught, crying throughout the night, and in the morning, she found herself holding a loaded shotgun, which her husband habitually kept at the ready. She entered Matthew's room, where she shot him in the back while he lay in bed. Matthew collapsed to the floor, bloodied foam emanating from his mouth and nose. According to Mary, as her husband lay dying, he whispered, "Why?" To which she responded, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Mary then gathered her daughters and fled the house, leaving her husband, who, as experts later determined, tried to reach for the phone to call for help, but lacked the strength to do so. The murder weapon was later discovered in the trunk of the car in which Mary escaped with the children. However, at the trial, Mary was unable to explain why she had taken the gun with her. The role-playing costumes found in their home were presented as evidence of the pastor's emotional abuse and humiliation of his wife. When Mary saw them, she turned pale and then became hysterical. Despite her inconsistent testimony, the court ultimately believed that Mary Winkler was the victim of domestic abuse and that the murder was a culmination of years of anger, resentment, and pain. However, this did not excuse her from taking responsibility for her actions. In April 2007, the court finally delivered its verdict in this complex case. Mary was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but the sentence sparked controversy due to her questionable mental state. Initially, she was expected to serve at least 6 years in prison, but ultimately received a sentence of less than a year. During her sentence, she spent 2 months in a psychiatric hospital where doctors assessed her ability to regain custody of her children. Upon her release in the summer of 2008, Mary was granted sole custody of her daughters, who had been living with their paternal grandparents. Matthew's parents were outraged, believing that Mary had deliberately killed their son and received a lenient sentence. They felt she should not have been given custody of the girls, but all their attempts to appeal the decision failed. The fraud case was never brought to trial because the bank failed to file formal charges, and as a result, the matter was completely dropped. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Irene Cortez. Irene Cortez, née Lucas, was born in 1980 in Granada, Spain. She grew up in a well-off family with a brother and sister. Her parents ran a successful small business, which her mother, Maria Lucas, expanded and continued to operate after her father's early passing. Thanks to her mother's efforts and the help of her uncle, Pedro Lucas, Irene wanted for nothing. As the eldest of the 3 siblings, she was a beautiful, outgoing girl who loved being the center of attention and attracted boys from an early age. Shortly after finishing school, she married and became pregnant at 17, giving birth to her first child. 2 years later, she had her second child. Despite becoming a mother at a young age, Irene's family supported her in pursuing a good education. In the early 2000s, Irene relocated to the resort city of Malaga with her husband and their 2 children. There, she launched an entertainment venue that quickly gained popularity and became profitable. Initially, it was a small disco bar, but it eventually evolved into a full-fledged nightclub in Malaga. They welcomed their 3rd child, and life seemed prosperous and stable. However, tragedy struck when Irene's husband was arrested at the age of 25 and sentenced to 5 years in prison for trafficking illegal substances. Sadly, he lost his life in prison under mysterious circumstances. With her husband gone, Irene was left alone to care for their children. Drawing strength from her own mother, who had single-handedly raised 3 children, Irene was determined to persevere. Despite the challenges, she successfully managed her business, earning a good income, and had ambitious plans for the future. Ferd Saras, born in 1976 in Baronia, Colombia, grew up in a large, impoverished family as the youngest of his siblings. After his parents separated in the early 1990s, he stayed with his mother, while his older siblings became independent. In 2001, at the age of 25, Ferd and his elderly mother moved to Spain in search of a better life, settling in Malaga, where he took on any job to support them. In 2005, Ferd began working as a waiter at a nightclub owned by Irene. She quickly noticed his hard work and reliability and was also drawn to him. Ferd, in turn, did his best to impress her. At the time, Irene's husband was in prison, and she intended to file for divorce once he was released, but he died unexpectedly before she could do so. Irene and Ferd's employer-employee relationship soon evolved into romance. Despite Irene having 3 children from previous relationships, and Ferd's humble background as a waiter who received a salary from her, their relationship blossomed. Within months of starting their relationship, they made the decision to cohabit. They moved into Irene's spacious apartment, and shortly after, Irene became pregnant with Ferd's child. They went on to have 2 children together. Although it is unclear whether they formally got married, Irene retained her first husband's surname, whereas the children she had with Ferd took on the Saras surname. Irene's past repeated itself in 2009 when her husband Ferd was arrested for distributing illegal substances and imprisoned. Just like her first husband, Ferd's imprisonment left Irene alone to care for their 5 children. Although he was sentenced to 3 years, Ferd served only 1.5 years due to good behavior and cooperation with the authorities. During Ferd's imprisonment, Irene found comfort in the arms of another man and lived with him for 1.5 years. However, upon his release, Ferd discovered Irene's infidelity and was understandably furious. He threatened Irene and her lover, even coming close to attacking the man, but narrowly avoided further legal trouble. Ultimately, the situation was resolved peacefully. Ferd chose to forgive Irene for the sake of their children, and they resumed their life together, as if the imprisonment and infidelity had never occurred. Irene's family members had always harbored doubts about Ferd. Her mother and uncle disapproved of their relationship, suspecting that Ferd was only interested in Irene's wealth. Additionally, Irene's older children from her previous marriage never accepted Ferd, whereas the youngest, whom Ferd had raised since the age of 2, saw him as a father figure. In early 2011, Irene's husband Ferd told her he needed to visit his homeland of Colombia because his father was severely ill. Ferd's estranged father had been diagnosed with advanced cancer, and his sister in Barranquilla had informed him of the situation. Irene, who had always wanted to visit Colombia, decided to accompany him. She was eager to meet Ferd's father, whom she had never met, and experience the famous Barranquilla Carnival, which usually takes place in late February. Irene, who hadn't taken a vacation in years due to her dedication to work and raising their 5 children, saw this trip as a much-needed break. They planned a 10-day trip, and Irene's mother and younger sister agreed to take care of her children during that time. Despite her mother Maria Lucas's attempts to dissuade her from the journey due to a bad premonition, Irene ignored her concerns. At the same time, the family faced financial difficulties due to a seasonal downturn in their business. Although Irene had €3,000 in cash saved at home, she discovered that the money had mysteriously disappeared on the eve of their trip, almost canceling their plans. Irene quickly borrowed the necessary funds from her uncle and close friends, booked their flight tickets, and reserved a hotel in the city center, thoroughly preparing for a journey that would tragically be her last. On February 27, 2011, Irene and her partner Ferd arrived in Colombia after an uneventful flight and checked into their hotel. Irene called her mother to reassure her that they had arrived safely. However, 2 days later, Ferd informed Irene's 14-year-old son that his mother had died. At first, Ferd claimed that Irene had died in an accident, but it soon emerged that she had been murdered during a robbery at a bar in the Baronia neighborhood. The case quickly gained widespread media attention in Colombia, with reports suggesting that Irene, a Spanish tourist, had been killed by robbers who had fled the scene, prompting a massive police manhunt. However, the circumstances of the robbery and murder seemed suspicious. The attackers did not appear to have stolen anything, instead shooting Irene in the heart before fleeing in haste. Despite witnessing the shooting, Farid appeared calm during an interview with journalists, which did not match the image of a grieving widower. The Spanish embassy in Bogotá confirmed Irene's murder and announced that her remains would be repatriated after the necessary investigations. The exact events of the night of March 2nd remain unclear, and authorities are currently pursuing the attackers responsible for the senseless crime. Surveillance footage provided crucial clues in the mysterious death of Irene Cortez. The footage, captured by cameras at the scene of the crime, shed light on the events of March 1st. That evening, Irene and her partner Farid Garris had made plans to meet Farid's brother, his sister, and their spouses. The group of 6 friends spent the day at the carnival, took a stroll around town, and then headed to a local bar for dinner and entertainment, following Farid's suggestion. By 1 a.m., Irene, Farid, and his relatives were the only customers remaining at the bar. At around 2 a.m., 2 young men, who looked out of place, sat down away from the group. They didn't order anything and seemed uncomfortable, which caught the attention of the bar manager due to their suspicious behavior. Additionally, their youthful appearance prompted the manager to check if they were of legal age to be in the bar. When asked for their IDs, the young men refused to comply, and when told to leave, one of them pulled out a gun, aiming it at the manager. The other man produced a knife, but quickly moved out of the camera's view. The gunman pushed the manager aside and approached Irene's table, announcing that they were being robbed and demanding that they hand over their mobile phones and cash. The man with the knife reappeared, presumably to collect the valuables, while the gunman continued to threaten the group. However, he didn't get a chance to act. Faced with the gunman, Irene was ordered to stand up so that Farid could be searched. As Irene reached for her purse, the assailant suddenly lunged at her with the hand holding the gun. A shot was fired, striking Irene directly in the chest, causing her to collapse to the floor. The assailants then fled the scene without taking any valuables. Farid and his brother chased after the robbers, while his sister tried to stop Irene's bleeding, and his brother's wife called the emergency services. Unfortunately, the culprits escaped. The men returned to the bar, trying to aid Irene, but it was too late. The emergency responders arrived quickly, but Irene died on the way to the hospital, leaving behind a baffling case and a grieving family. A massive manhunt was launched to catch the perpetrators, followed by their arrest and trial for the robbery and murder that took Irene Cortez's life. With the city full of tourists for the carnival, law enforcement utilized all available resources to ensure their safety. The next day, the authorities apprehended the primary suspect, Brian Dario, who was identified as the gunman. Shortly after, Dario implicated his partner in crime, Juan Carlos. The 18-year-old Juan Carlos subsequently surrendered to the police, hoping to receive a more lenient sentence. During the interrogation, Dario claimed that financial difficulties, debts, and a sick child in need of expensive medical treatment drove him to commit the crime, a claim later supported by his relatives. He maintained that Irene's shooting was accidental, occurring when he tried to snatch her purse. Juan Carlos claimed he was an unknowing participant in the crime, saying that Brian had not shared his plans with him. According to Juan Carlos, Brian only asked him to provide backup in a job where he would carry a small knife purely for intimidation purposes, not to cause harm. He also claimed that once he realized Brian's true intentions, he left the scene. However, the surveillance footage told a different story, clearly showing Juan Carlos returning to Brian after he initially left. With both Juan Carlos and Brian in police custody and having confessed to the crime, it seemed like the case was closed, and they would soon be facing prison sentences. Dario was sentenced to 23 years in prison for robbery and homicide, while Carlos got 17 years. However, new evidence pointed to Farid's involvement, including his wife's family accusing him of masterminding her murder. A private investigator found that Farid had access to missing €3,000, which may have been used to pay Dario. Farid also lied about his father's cancer to justify a trip to Colombia and suspiciously suggested visiting the crime scene, staying late into the night. The detective conducted a thorough examination of the camera recordings, interpreting the footage and drawing his own conclusions. He observed that the criminal's behavior was unusual. Juan appeared frightened and seemed uncertain about what was happening, while Brian approached Ferd and lifted him up, but didn't directly threaten him with a gun. It seemed like he were acquainted and were acting in unison. Next, Ferd moved behind Irene, who was sitting at the table, in a peculiar manner. When she reached into her bag to retrieve her wallet, the gunman looked at Ferd as if waiting for a signal. It's unclear whether he received any kind of sign, as the victim and her husband moved out of camera view shortly after the shot. The man chased the killer, but in the expert's opinion, he deliberately allowed him to escape. However, this assertion can be disputed, as Brian was armed with a gun, and Ferd could reasonably have feared for his life. After the chosen one was declared dead, the man's behavior raised questions. Despite the tragedy, he appeared composed, giving interviews to reporters and discussing details of the event without showing visible signs of distress or grief. Another puzzling aspect was his decision to inform Irene's 14-year-old son of his mother's death rather than contacting her mother, uncle, or other adult relatives. According to Maria Lucas, this choice was deliberate, intended to inflict pain on the teenager as punishment for not respecting the stepfather's authority. Irene's uncle, Pedro Lucas, was the first to speak out in the press, sharing his suspicions and the investigation's findings. He believed that Ferd had planned the trip in advance, luring Irene into a trap. The stolen money was allegedly used to hire a killer, and Ferd intended to assume guardianship over the children and take control of his late wife's business. Ferd's mother came to her son's defense, insisting that he loved Irene and her children deeply and would never harm them. However, she inadvertently revealed a telling detail, mentioning that Irene's infidelity had offended Ferd's pride, suggesting a potential motive for the crime. A new development emerged concerning Garris leaving Spain, allegedly using fake documents to do so. This was noteworthy because he was not allowed to leave the country at that time, having recently been released from prison on parole. Garris denied this information, claiming he left Spain legally and that Irene acted as his guarantor. Irene's body was returned to her native Spain 12 days after the tragedy, and a closed casket funeral was held due to the decomposition of her remains. Hundreds attended the funeral, including family, friends, neighbors, and even those who didn't personally know Cortez but wanted to express their condolences to the family. The only person absent from the farewell ceremony was Ferd, who feared returning from Colombia due to concerns about potential retribution. Ferd claimed that his late wife's relatives had repeatedly threatened him and his elderly mother. Before flying back to Spain, he intended to request protection from the authorities to ensure his safety. He sought a protective order to attend the funeral, but his request was denied, and Garris decided not to take the risk. In response, Ferd filed a court complaint against his deceased wife's relatives, alleging they prevented him from returning home. However, Maria and Pedro Lucas denied his claims, stating they wanted him to return to Spain to face trial. New court proceedings focused on fresh claims against Ferd, questioning Dario and Carlos in a Colombian prison about their link to Garris and prior planning. Brian denied this, saying the murder was an unplanned result of a botched robbery, and he never met Ferd before. Dario admitted that he was under the influence of alcohol and prohibited substances on the evening in question, which explained his poor recollection of the event's chronology. Carlos, on the other hand, maintained that his friend had not involved him in his plans, and that everything that happened in the bar had been as shocking to him as it was to those they attacked. Juan seemed to be telling the truth, but Brian's words about who made the fatal shot raised some doubts. It was puzzling that, despite not committing the robbery, Brian ended up in prison, yet his sick child still received the necessary expensive treatment. Brian claimed that kind-hearted people who learned about his motive had helped him. However, the Lucas family lawyers attempted to prove that the €3,000 stolen from Irene, which Ferd had paid for her murder, were spent on the treatment, but this version was never proven. Garris decided to return to Spain only after obtaining a court order that guaranteed his safety. Several months had passed since the tragedy, and the media frenzy had subsided. Upon his return, Garris claimed to have brought investigation materials that proved his innocence in his wife's murder. He cited his main reason for returning as a desire to care for the children he shared with Irene, who had been under the care of the deceased's relatives during his absence. 6 months after the incident, Ferd granted a major interview in which he shared a devastating update. He had lost almost everything that mattered. He was unemployed, his passport had been revoked, and as a result, he was stuck in the country with no way to leave. To make matters worse, his friends had abandoned him, and his late wife's mother and uncle had forbidden him from seeing his own children. Ferd repeatedly clashed with Maria and Pedro Lucas in court, alleging that they had threatened him. Meanwhile, they tried to prove that he was involved in Irene's murder. Despite their efforts, neither party could provide sufficient evidence to support their claims. In the end, the grandmother and uncle retained custody of the children, and Ferd was unable to inherit any of his late wife's assets. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of the Ortega family. Born in March 1986, Paula was the second child in a large family. She excelled at Dario Figaro Alara School and later attended the Polytechnic University, where she developed a keen interest in the hospitality industry. After her studies, Paula actively contributed to the growth of her family's business, which specialized in party goods manufacturing. The Ortega Alcocer family was well-to-do and renowned in Sangolquí and neighboring Ecuadorian towns. Paula's dad built a successful party goods business in Ecuador, producing balloons, piñatas, and more. The family opened stores in Sangolquí and Quito, with each member contributing. Paula managed a store and started a party planning service which flourished, bringing joy to people and fulfilling her. Paula Ortega's personal life struggled despite her family's business success. Her first marriage to Carlos Pedro was unhappy due to his alcoholism, infidelity, and theft. After their daughter's birth, Carlos's behavior worsened, leading Paula to end the marriage. With family support and her passion for work, Paula regained a sense of normalcy and hope. A decade after her previous experiences, Paula met Christian Diego, a tall, dark-haired, and handsome man who was 4 years her junior. Despite having lost faith in finding a worthy partner, Paula was initially cautious around Christian, who was persistent in his pursuit of her. However, Christian soon won her over with his calm and reliable nature, forming a strong bond with Paula's daughter, which greatly impressed her. After 2 years of dating, Paula's heart finally warmed up to Christian, and they decided to tie the knot in a beautiful wedding ceremony. Christian took on a paternal role, embracing Paula's daughter as his own, and soon they welcomed another daughter, Maria, into their family. During their 5-year marriage, Christian fully integrated into Paula's father's company, taking on a key role in finding locations for new stores. This job frequently required him to travel, leaving Paula and their daughters at home. Coming from a humble working-class background, Christian had always harbored ambitions of owning a large business one day. Unfortunately, some individuals are skilled at hiding their dark side, and it's possible to live alongside ruthless criminals for years without ever suspecting a thing. But the truth always has a way of revealing itself, often in the most unexpected and explosive ways. Paula Ortega and her husband Christian seemed like the perfect couple to those around them, with a happy and successful relationship. But beneath the surface, things were not as they appeared. After Paula's father passed away in 2020 following a long illness, the family's business began to fall apart. Christian, driven by a desire for power and wealth, tried to take Paula's father's place, but his lack of business skills led to a string of failed deals. Frustrated, Christian started taking out his anger on his family, initially in secret, but soon openly abandoning them for a life of partying and recklessness. Without Paula's father to keep him in check, Christian's true nature began to emerge, marked by a string of affairs and heavy drinking. Paula was determined not to repeat the mistakes of her previous traumatic marriage, and she refused to tolerate Christian's abusive behavior. Their home had become a war zone, with Christian's true nature, an ambitious egoist who craved power and obedience, on full display. After a particularly vicious argument, Paula secretly filed for divorce, fearing Christian's reaction. However, when Christian discovered her plans, his behavior abruptly changed. Desperate to maintain his position in the family and avoid losing his comfortable lifestyle, he reformed his ways and appeared to transform for the better. He expressed remorse, claiming to be confused and overwhelmed, and professed his love and appreciation for his family. Paula, still hesitant to be alone again, was convinced by Christian's eloquence to give him another chance. Christian suggested a romantic dinner at home, and Paula agreed, sending their daughters to her parents' house to prepare for the evening. Despite her reservations, she was excited to recreate a happy family atmosphere. The evening at the Ortega home was filled with celebration and comfort. The living room was decorated with festive garlands, and the dining table was warmly lit by candles. Christian poured a bottle of dry white wine while Paula served a hot meal. The night seemed to be a genuine step towards reconciliation, until Christian suddenly made a shocking proposal that disrupted the peaceful atmosphere. Christian confessed to his wife a costly mistake in his bid to take over the family business, causing significant losses. The company now needed a new investor, which would mean giving up part of the firm. Paula refused to consider it, wanting her father's business to stay in the family. Despite his efforts, she wouldn't budge, leaving Christian frustrated and their relationship strained. On January 2, 2023, Paula took her daughter to the playroom before preparing for work at her shop. She had a large order to fulfill, involving balloon fountains and party decorations. During lunch, two slim men in dark hoodies arrived. Paula opened the door, expecting a courier. The men startled her, scanned the shop, and pinned her against the wall. Just as things got tense, a courier knocked on the door, prompting the men to flee. Paula handed over the package, her hands shaking with fear. She closed the shop, then called her mother, her voice trembling as she expressed her fear. Although her mother suggested reporting the incident to the police, Paula declined, attributing her reaction to mere fright, since nothing harmful had occurred. Instead of reopening her shop, Paula spent the day consumed by thoughts of Christian's actions and the identity and motives of the two mysterious men. Seeking comfort, she took a stroll through the city, stopping at a cafe for coffee and walking through the park to clear her head. Later, Paula visited her sister, and they had a heart-to-heart conversation over cups of tea, overwhelmed by the day's shocking events. Paula confided in her sister about the scary encounter at her shop, as well as her difficulties in her marriage. She shared how Christian had changed after her father's passing, indulging in alcohol and being openly unfaithful. Although she normally kept her personal struggles to herself, her emotions overpowered her pride and shame, allowing her to open up about the demeaning treatment she had been tolerating. Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, later recalled that Paula had spoken about her long-term life plans, including her dreams for her daughters to grow up and become professionals. Adriana also remembered that Paula had expressed her intention to continue running her business. According to Adriana, Paula was a selfless and extremely hard-working person. After her emotional talk with her sister, Paula headed home. However, Christian called her, saying he was picking up their daughter from the playroom and would stop by the shop to pick Paula up as well. Their conversation was brief, with kids' voices in the background. Paula didn't get a chance to tell Christian about the scary incident at her shop, especially since she suspected he might be involved. Reluctantly, Paula went back to work, putting her family's needs before her own. Christian arrived alone, explaining that their daughter had wanted to go home, and he couldn't resist her. He told Paula that the kids were at home, eagerly waiting for hamburgers, a modern family tradition. Instead of going to the nearest fast food joint, Christian took Paula to the Courtyard restaurant at a nearby shopping center. He parked the car by a secluded wall, locked it securely, and left Paula inside to collect their order. Relaxing in the passenger seat after a long and tiring day, Paula closed her eyes, unaware of the danger that was approaching. Shortly after, she recognized two familiar figures standing near the car, talking loudly and circling the vehicle. She realized they were the same unexpected visitors who had come to her shop earlier. Paula tried to remain calm, trusting that the car was secure and that Christian would return soon. But suddenly, the car's lights flashed, and the door locks disengaged. Panicked, Paula scrambled to the back seat, hiding between the seats and covering her head with her arms, but she was trapped with no way to escape. One intruder casually got into the driver's seat, while the other joined him in the back, pinning Paula down even more. She felt something warm trickling down her arm before everything went dark. The attack left Paula with 11 knife wounds to her neck and 2 to her face. The assailants fled the scene, leaving Paula alone and gravely injured. Christian returned just 7 minutes later to a horrific sight. The car's interior was drenched in blood. Frantic, he called emergency services, but struggled to clearly communicate the situation and give the emergency coordinates. He then called Paula's mother to report the attack before driving to the hospital himself. Tragically, Paula succumbed to her injuries in the emergency room, passing away before receiving the necessary medical attention. Christian was overcome with grief and shock after losing his wife Paula, screaming and throwing chairs in the waiting room. The community was stunned, the family devastated, wondering who attacked Paula and why. Initially, the prosecution thought it was a robbery gone wrong, citing the stolen $600 and gold necklace. Security footage showed 2 men in hoodies visiting her store, but their faces were unclear. 2 months after Paula's death, her family sought justice, but the case stalled. However, Adriana, Paula's sister, revealed a crucial conversation with Paula, which cast doubt on Christian's innocence. She exposed Christian's infidelity and violence, and Paula's consideration of divorce, giving him a motive to kill. The prosecution then searched the couple's home, finding incriminating messages on Christian's phone and a document to transfer the company, which Paula refused to sign. After the incident, Christian was investigated for suspected homicide. New evidence revealed a complex web of deceit in the couple's relationship. 2 weeks later, it was discovered Christian had transferred $2,000 to an unknown woman's account, adding to suspicion. The most shocking aspect was Christian using Paula's account to make a payment while she was dying, instead of helping her. The woman who received the $2,000 transfer from Christian on January 2, 2005, was identified as 28-year-old Laura Castillo. She was questioned by the police and revealed that her bank card had gone missing a couple of days prior, but she hadn't thought much of it since her brother often used it. Despite denying any connection to Christian, Laura's solid alibi during the incident ruled her out as a suspect, and she was released. The case stalled again until Laura returned to police, saying her brother had given back her bank card. She described him, matching one of the surveillance camera images near the crime scene. One attacker had forgotten his hood, revealing Byron and Morton Castillo, repeat offenders with a long criminal record. They were arrested, leaving the question, what linked these criminals to respected family man Christian? Paula Ortega was a victim of a carjacking at a gas station on December 8, 2022. One man distracted her while his accomplice stole her car. Fortunately, her daughters weren't in the car. Surveillance footage identified the Castillo brothers, who targeted her before. Ironically, Paula had met them earlier that day. Christian's claim that thieves contacted him raised doubts about his innocence. He met them, recovering Paula's belongings, including her wallet. Experienced investigators were puzzled by Christian's boldness. Surveillance cameras identified the carjackers. Christian, under suspicion, created a new defense, claiming the brothers were extorting him. Police questioned suspects separately, telling them one had confessed. Martin Castillo buckled, admitting Christian paid him $2,000 to kill his wife, promising another $2,000 after. In a reenactment, Martin demonstrated how he inflicted 11 fatal stab wounds. He then calmly revealed the details of the arrangement. Martin also revealed that the theft of Paula's car and the attack on her shop were part of Christian's plan to put pressure on her. As it turned out, Paula lived a few hours longer than Christian had intended, on November 29, 2023. All three suspects appeared in court, where the prosecution presented a clear picture of the events surrounding the murder, pieced together from various sources. Forensic analysis of surveillance camera footage and audio recordings from the area where Christian had parked his car revealed a chilling and disturbing narrative. In a disturbing surveillance video, Christian Diego is seen getting out of his car and walking towards a shopping center elevator. Shortly after, he remotely unlocks his car from about half a block away, allowing two attackers to get in and assault Paula. The prosecutor's report highlights Christian's suspicious behavior after the attack, including repeatedly looking back, approaching the car, stopping, returning, pacing back and forth, and making phone calls. Remarkably, when he finds his wife bleeding heavily, he shows no shock or urgency to help her, instead driving her to a hospital that is far away. Christian's actions, meticulously recreated from surveillance footage, especially in the first 4 minutes after Paula's attack, are revealed to be cold and calculated as she remains alive but bleeding in the car. Standing nearby, Christian ruthlessly transfers money to his accomplices for their role in the assault. Paula's family lawyers are urging the court to consider these videos as factors that make the crime even more serious. The reconstructed sequence of events presented in court proves that the crime was planned in advance. Around 1:30 p.m., two individuals arrived at Paula's store, which happened to be near Christian's location. This suggests that the crime may have been planned to take place during the lunchtime closure when Paula was alone. However, prosecutor Marlon Calderon pointed out inconsistencies in the story, questioning how the assailants knew the couple would be at the store if they weren't following them, yet still managed to arrive on time to commit the crime. Christian's suspicious behavior, including not fully raising the car window, unlocking the doors near the store, pacing back and forth before helping his wife, making phone calls, and not seeking immediate medical attention at a nearby clinic, are key pieces of evidence that implicate him in orchestrating the murder. The trial of Christian and Paula Ortega exposed the dark truth of femicide, the intentional murder of women due to their gender. Despite Paula's professional success, Christian's youthful energy fueled his abuse and contempt towards her. Trapped in her own making, Paula enabled Christian's control until his sinister plot culminated in her tragic death. More than 10 witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, provided testimonies that, along with a thorough examination of internal and external family communications, revealed Christian's real intentions and goals. Without having the legal right to sign documents, Christian tried to force Paula to transfer her company shares to him. However, he failed. Although Christian did not physically harm Paula, he subjected her to severe psychological abuse, which he cleverly disguised as a perfect family life, as stated in the Prosecutor General's report. Video evidence led to Christian being placed in preventive isolation for being the mastermind behind the crimes. This measure is not the same as being arrested, but rather a strategy to neutralize a threat to society. After this action, Christian planned to flee the country. In the high-profile case against Christian Diego, who was accused of planning his wife's death, his defense team worked hard to portray him as a victim. However, they were unable to refute key evidence, including surveillance footage and fake company transfer documents. Desperate to avoid conviction, The defense attempted to portray the accused as mentally unstable, citing incidents of sudden rage. However, multiple psychiatrists evaluated Christian and deemed him competent to stand trial. As the situation grew dire, his defense counsel suggested he flee the country, asking if his passport was ready and proposing he buy a ticket to Panama for the next day. But this escape plan failed when Christian's search for Central American flight tickets alerted the authorities. The prosecutor swiftly detained Christian for 8 hours, then charged him and presented the case details to a judge specializing in domestic violence cases. Christian was held in preliminary detention pending trial, accused of being the mastermind behind a brutal act that left 2 young children orphaned and a family grieving the loss of their loved one. The Ortega family demanded justice for this heinous crime, emphasizing its devastating impact on the children and their loss. In a case that captivated public attention, the jury found Christian and his 2 accomplices guilty of a meticulously planned and intentional act of extreme brutality. The unremorseful trio was sentenced to 26 years in prison. The municipal authorities of Ruminahui offer their condolences to the family and friends of Paula Alcácer, who tragically passed away. They extend their deepest sympathies to those affected by her loss, an esteemed businesswoman, friend, mother, and wife who made significant contributions to the canton's development and brought prosperity to those around her. Paula's case highlights the disturbing trend of violence against women, as reported by the Latin American Association for Alternative Developments, which revealed a staggering 332 fatalities in 2022 due to gender-based violence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ilana Frick. Ilana Christina Frick was born in September 1977 in Windsor, Ontario, to George and Anna, who had immigrated to Canada from Croatia in the early 1970s. She was the younger of 2 daughters, with an older sister named Caroline, with whom she was extremely close. Ilana's birth was considered a miracle by her parents. Her mother, Anna, had faced serious health complications after her first pregnancy, and doctors had told them that Anna would likely never conceive again. Anna and George made a significant effort to ensure their daughter's well-being and meet their needs, in spite of the difficulties they faced. They both worked at a car factory, striving to give Ilana and Caroline a good education and a comfortable life. Growing up, Ilana was a diligent and passionate student. She spent most of her free time reading, also found time to attend dance classes, practice gymnastics, and compete in track and field events. During her summer breaks, Ilana chose to work to help support her family, often working in cornfields and learning to manage her finances wisely. As she progressed through school, Ilana excelled in math and science, and by the time she reached high school, she had set her sights on a career in medicine. Ilana graduated at the top of her high school class and was accepted into a prestigious medical university. Around the same time, she started dating Matthew Ryan, a classmate from high school who was also studying in the same department. They maintained a long-distance relationship after graduation, with Ilana moving to Ottawa to pursue a residency program at the university. Matthew, on the other hand, chose to work at a local hospital and did not pursue further education. Despite the distance, Ilana and Matthew's relationship continued until nearly 2002. They had even made plans to get married, but ultimately decided to remain friends. By then, Ilana was interning at a top clinic and was working towards earning a doctorate, while Matthew's career had not advanced. In February 2003, during a night shift at the hospital, Ilana met Mohammed Shamji, a new colleague. She was immediately drawn to him. Mohammed, who was just a year older than Ilana, was a resident in the neurosurgery department and came from a family of prominent doctors. Mohammed Shamji was born and raised in Ottawa, Ontario, into a family of medical professionals. His father, Farid Shamji, was a well-known surgeon, and his mother, Edith, was a talented psychiatrist. Mohammed's older brother, Ali, also pursued a career in medicine, becoming a medical biophysicist. Both brothers attended Yale University, and later, Muhammad returned to Canada to earn his doctoral degree from the University of Western Ontario. Additionally, Muhammad had taken an interest in a blonde woman, but at first, he did not make any attempts to approach her. Ilana was immediately drawn to Muhammad, a tall, dark-skinned man, and sought to capture his attention. He eventually asked for her number and initiated contact, marking the beginning of their romance. Initially, Ilana perceived Muhammad as a reserved individual who hesitated on dates, jumped between topics, or fell silent, giving the impression of being introverted. However, it was later discovered that his behavior was not due to shyness but rather a lack of interest. Unbeknownst to Ilana, Muhammad was seeing another woman at the time and intentionally kept this a secret. When Ilana discovered she had a rival, she became resolute in her determination to be the only woman in his life. The first year of their relationship was tumultuous, with they breaking up on 3 separate occasions, rekindling. This was largely due to Ilana's persistence in pursuing the relationship. Despite her parents' awareness of the issues and their encouragement to leave Muhammad, Ilana remained resolute, convinced that she had found her soulmate. Ilana often showered Muhammad with gifts, surprises, and home-cooked meals, but he only sporadically reciprocated her affection. Muhammad seemed content to accept Ilana's displays of love without feeling obligated to return them. This dynamic created an emotional imbalance, where Ilana grew increasingly dependent on Muhammad. In the summer of 2004, Ilana and Muhammad received unexpected news: Ilana, unplanned pregnancy. A sudden life-changing event forced them to rethink their future plans. While both were anxious about the news, Muhammad felt a strong obligation to marry Ilana before the baby was born, as is traditional in his conservative Muslim upbringing. In September 2004, they had a 2-part wedding. The first ceremony adhered to Muhammad's family's cultural customs, while the second was a more casual celebration with friends at a popular restaurant. At the time, the newlyweds seemed happy and in love. However, their happiness was short-lived. When their daughter, Yasmin, was born in January 2005, their marital problems became apparent. Muhammad's focus on his career and education left Ilana and their newborn daughter feeling neglected. To make matters worse, Muhammad had been hoping for a son and wasn't afraid to express his disappointment. This marked the beginning of a troubled marriage that would ultimately end in tragedy. After having her child, Ilana took maternity leave to care for her daughter and manage the household. When Muhammad returned home, he would often go straight to his room and spend very little time with his wife and children, which left Ilana feeling abandoned and unappreciated. As time passed, Muhammad's behavior worsened, and he became increasingly critical and abusive. He would insult Ilana's appearance, refuse to eat her cooking, berating and insulting his wife. Despite her growing unhappiness, Ilana chose not to confide in anyone, including her close friends and parents, about her marital problems. However, one day, while Ilana was on the phone with her mother, Muhammad returned home in a bad mood and began berating Ilana in front of her mother. Ilana's mother tried to defend her, but Muhammad shifted the blame onto Ilana, claiming she was responsible for their troubled marriage. Ilana's mother advised her to end the relationship with Muhammad and file for divorce, but Ilana declined, hoping that she could still salvage the marriage. Unfortunately, Muhammad's actions worsened, and he started physically harming Ilana on top of the verbal abuse she had already been enduring. The situation reached a boiling point in the summer of 2005 when Muhammad punched Ilana in the face, breaking her nose. Fearing for her safety and that of her child, Ilana fled to friends and reported the incident to the police, finally deciding to end the marriage and leave Muhammad for good. Muhammad surprisingly begged his wife, Ilana, to come back, vowing to never physically abuse her again or even raise his voice. He promised that their family life would be perfect, and he would control his temper. However, Muhammad's sudden change of heart was motivated by self-interest. As a young neurosurgeon, he was about to start at Duke University, working towards his doctorate, and a criminal conviction would ruin his promising medical career. Muhammad's primary concern was his own future, but he successfully convinced Ilana to drop the charges against him. She even agreed to follow him to North Carolina, where he would pursue his studies. Ilana's loved ones were confused when she didn't leave her husband despite the difficulties she was facing. Instead, she moved to another country with Muhammad. When they encouraged her to reconsider, she stood her ground. When the family settled in the US, life appeared more tranquil for a time. Muhammad earned a highly competitive spot in an elite engineering program. Meanwhile, Ilana joined Duke University on a full tuition scholarship. Their relationship grew stronger and became more confident in their decision to have more children. After the arrival of their daughter Fiza, they welcomed another child. Unlike their son's relatively smooth birth, Fiza's delivery was more challenging. The new addition to the family brought immense joy, and they felt grateful for their family growing closer. What secrets lay hidden behind the perfect facade of this family? In the late summer of 2009, Ilana and her husband, along with their children, returned to Ottawa, Canada, and settled back into their home. Ilana, however, soon ended her maternity leave and secured a job as a family doctor at a renowned hospital, quickly building a solid reputation. Her husband, meanwhile, juggled work, studies, and teaching at a university. As social media gained popularity in the late 2000s, they started a personal blog that portrayed them as an ideal family. They shared photos of their vacations, accomplishments in science, and luxury lifestyle, complete with a lavish home. They even posted about attending prestigious conferences and trendy resorts. To outsiders, they seemed like a happy, successful, wealthy, and deeply in love couple with no problems. However, this perfect image hid a dark reality. Behind closed doors, Muhammad continued to exert strict control over Ilana. He monitored her interactions, dictated what she wore, and even checked her email and social media accounts. He openly criticized her appearance, style, and parenting methods, leaving Ilana feeling silent and trapped. As time passed, the tension and aggression between them became stressed, with Muhammad frequently yelling at Ilana and blaming her for their arguments and discord. In 2011, a prestigious medical center in Calgary offered a talented neurosurgeon, Muhammad, a fellowship in spinal surgery. Muhammad accepted the offer and relocated to Calgary, but he had to leave his family in Ottawa because his wife, Ilana, couldn't take a leave of absence from her job for over a year. They had to manage a long-distance relationship. During one of Muhammad's visits home, their relationship faced its biggest challenge yet. While at home, Muhammad accidentally left his laptop open, and Ilana saw a message from another woman on his social media account. The content of the message implied a romantic involvement. When Ilana confronted Muhammad, he confessed to having an affair, which was a devastating blow to Ilana. Ilana's family believed that this was the final straw, and they were convinced that she wouldn't forgive Muhammad again. However, Ilana decided to give their marriage another chance. Muhammad promised to end the affair, and they decided to start fresh in Toronto, where Muhammad had secured a high-paying job. Despite this fresh start, their marital issues persisted. After their move to Toronto, Muhammad expressed his desire to have a son, and Ilana agreed to try again, hoping that a new child would bring stability to their family. In October 2013, they had a son named Marius, a long-awaited addition to their family. Despite the new baby, his behavior towards his wife remained unchanged. Over the next few years, he devoted himself to his medical career, becoming a skilled and respected neurosurgeon known for his ability to tackle complex cases that other doctors avoided. Meanwhile, the wife also advanced in her career, becoming a representative for the Ontario Medical Association. However, the tension between them began to escalate, and his behavior towards his wife became increasingly aggressive. He went beyond verbal abuse, resorting to physical violence against her. During a family ski trip, the wife suffered a deep cut on her arm that required stitches, as well as other injuries. She initially claimed that the injuries were a result of a skiing accident. However, she later confided in her best friend that the injuries were actually inflicted by her husband. Following another heated argument over his latest infidelity, Ilana discovered that her husband, Muhammad, was having an affair with a colleague. After overhearing a suspicious phone conversation, Ilana confronted him, which led to a violent outburst, and he physically abused her. A friend, who was aware of the situation, advised Ilana to end her marriage, but she refused. Her friend jokingly suggested that Ilana should retaliate by having an affair of her own. Although the suggestion was made in jest, Ilana might have considered it a viable option to get back at her unfaithful husband. During the summer of 2016, their relationship continued to deteriorate. Their children were away at camp or staying with their grandparents, leaving Ilana and Muhammad to face their marital problems alone. In a surprising turn of events, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary in early September, even sharing the news on social media. However, their happiness was short-lived, as they began discussing divorce just a week later. Despite his marital transgressions, Muhammad refused to acknowledge his actions as grounds for divorce, claiming that he was happy with his current situation. On the other hand, a desperate Ilana initiated an affair with a coworker who had been flirting with her, escalating their relationship turmoil. Elena found herself swept up in a new romance, feeling cherished and adored by her partner. This was a welcome change from her current situation, and she reveled in the long-absent sensation of being loved and desired. However, her personal life was about to take a dramatic turn. A fierce argument erupted in the family on November 25, 2016. Elena informed her husband that their divorce was unavoidable. The following day, she consulted with a divorce attorney and then departed for a 3-day medical conference in another city. While Elena was away, her husband, Muhammad, sent her a series of messages, begging her to reconsider and work on saving their marriage for the sake of their children. Elena returned home on November 30th and made a final phone call to her parents. Although her voice betrayed some anxiety, she reassured them that everything was okay. Unbeknownst to her family, Elena had attempted to call the police that evening, but in her distress, she accidentally misdialed the number, leading to a devastating outcome. On December 1st, Anna tried to contact her daughter Ilana but was unable to reach her. Concerned, Anna called her son-in-law Muhammad to ask what was wrong. Muhammad claimed that Ilana had packed her bags in the middle of the night and left him and their children to be with her lover. However, Anna and her husband were skeptical of Muhammad's story, knowing that their daughter would never abandon her children. They asked a close friend of Ilana's to keep an eye on the Muhammad home while they traveled to Toronto to report Ilana's disappearance to the police. The friend reported that Ilana's car was still parked in the driveway, which only added to the family's concern. When Anna and her husband arrived at their daughter's house, they didn't notice anything out of the ordinary at first. However, Muhammad was agitated and insisted that Ilana was with her lover, repeating the same story he had told the police earlier. After Ilana was reported missing, a shocking discovery was made. The police found a body inside a suitcase. A man walking his dog by the river on December 2nd noticed a new-looking suitcase under a bridge about 24 miles from the suspect Muhammad's home. His curiosity got the best of him, so he opened the suitcase, discovering the body of a blonde woman. The police were immediately notified, and the body was taken to the medical examiner for identification and analysis. Fortunately, identifying the owner of the suitcase was not difficult because the perpetrator had left the luggage tag attached, which still had her name and travel information from her recent trip. Her parents confirmed the identity as Ilana. An autopsy revealed her cause of death to be mechanical asphyxiation and a broken neck. Additionally, her body showed signs of abuse with multiple bruises and abrasions. Notably, the victim was found dressed in pajamas with no shoes. Considering the victim's position in clothes, it appears she was placed inside the suitcase immediately after her death. The investigation led to the suspect's arrest later that evening at a coffee shop. Evidence indicated he was planning to leave the country. A lawyer accompanied the suspect during his meeting at the time of arrest. However, law enforcement thwarted the escape. Subsequently, Muhammad, the prime witness turned suspect, was arrested, formally charging him with Alana's first-degree murder. Muhammad denied any involvement in the incident, but a disturbing detail soon came to light. Their 12-year-old daughter, Yasmin, had unintentionally witnessed her mother's murder. Yasmin reported hearing screams and noise coming from her parents' room, prompting her to rush there. She opened the door slightly and saw her father kneeling behind the bed, while her mother was likely on the floor, out of her sight. Muhammad ordered Yasmin to leave the room immediately, shut the door, and go back to bed. The next morning, he told his daughters that their mother had left. Despite her young age, Yasmin sensed that something terrible had occurred, but she couldn't fathom that her father was responsible for her mother's death. To avoid putting his daughter through the trauma of testifying in court, the accused confessed to the crime. He recounted the events of that fateful evening, stating that he and his wife had argued over her alleged infidelity and desire for a divorce. Muhammad claimed that he didn't intend to harm his wife, but the situation escalated rapidly. The argument turned violent, and when his wife tried to call the police, he knocked the phone out of her hand. She began screaming, and Muhammad struck her multiple times in the face before pinning her to the floor and strangling her with his hands. Muhammad's daughter entered the room, but couldn't see what had happened behind the bed. By the time Muhammad realized his wife was not breathing, it was too late. In a desperate attempt to revive her, he made a fatal mistake, breaking her neck. Panicked, he placed her body in a large suitcase and drove around for hours, unsure of what to do. Eventually, he stopped at a small bridge over a river and threw the suitcase into the water, hoping the current would carry it away. However, the suitcase got stuck against the bridge's foundation, hidden in the darkness. During the trial of the surgeon, a scandal emerged involving his father, Ferd Shamji. The elderly man made derogatory comments about his deceased daughter-in-law, trying to justify his son's actions by claiming she had been unfaithful and provoked him. As a result, his medical license was revoked. Muhammad was found guilty of second-degree murder in April 2019 and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he may be eligible for parole in 14 years, considering the time he served during the trial. This means he could be released as early as 2030. Additionally, Muhammad was prohibited from contacting his children or his wife's parents and was ordered to pay them a substantial amount of compensation. His medical license was also permanently revoked, preventing him from practicing medicine or teaching again. The children who have lost their parents are now being cared for by Alana's parents.